Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought I'd be afraid of the house next door, but that was before he moved in. The first time I saw him, I was watering my front lawn. The moving truck had just pulled away, leaving behind a trail of dust and the faint scent of diesel. I watched as he emerged from his new home, a tall figure silhouetted against the fading evening light. He stood there for a moment, motionless, before his head slowly turned in my direction. I raised my hand in a friendly wave, ready to introduce myself. But he didn't wave back. He just stared. Even from across the street, I could feel the intensity of his gaze. It made my skin prickle, like I was being dissected under a microscope. After what felt like an eternity, he abruptly turned and went back inside, the door closing with a definitive click. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. He's probably just shy, I told myself, focusing on the cool water spraying over my hands as I adjusted the hose nozzle. Moving is stressful. He'll warm up eventually. But he didn't. Days passed, and I barely saw him leave the house. The curtains in his front windows remained drawn, but sometimes, when I was getting the mail or heading to my car, I'd catch a glimpse of movement behind them. A shadow shifting, the fabric twitching ever so slightly. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I couldn't help it. It was about a week after he moved in that I first noticed him watching me from his window. I was in my kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when something made me look up. There he was, standing in his front window, eyes locked on me. I nearly sliced my finger, startled by his sudden appearance. I gave an awkward wave, trying to be neighborly despite the growing knot in my stomach. He didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. He just kept staring, his face a blank mask. I turned away, focusing on the carrots in front of me, the steady rhythm of my knife against the cutting board. When I looked back up, he was gone. But that was just the beginning. Soon, it seemed like every time I looked out a window or stepped outside, he was there, watching. Sometimes from behind his curtains, sometimes openly standing at his window. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him in his front yard, just standing there, staring at my house. I quickly closed my curtains, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it from across the street. I started changing my routines, trying to be unpredictable. I'd leave for work at different times, take various routes home. But somehow, he always seemed to know. No matter when I left or returned, there he'd be, eyes following my every move. I considered talking to him, confronting him about his behavior, but something held me back. Maybe it was the coldness in his eyes, or the way his presence seemed to suck all the warmth out of the air. Whatever it was, every instinct I had screamed at me to stay away. As the days turned into weeks, his behavior grew more erratic. I'd hear strange noises coming from his house at all hours, banging, scraping, sometimes what sounded like muffled shouting. Once, I could have sworn I heard a woman crying. But when I strained to listen closer, the sound abruptly cut off. I started losing sleep, jumping at every sound, constantly checking and rechecking my locks. My friends noticed the change in me, commenting on the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinched at sudden movements. I brushed off their concerns, not sure how to explain that I was being terrorized by someone who hadn't actually done anything. Then came the night that changed everything. I was up late, unable to sleep as usual. The house was quiet. The only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I was scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety in my gut. When I heard it, a creak, coming from downstairs. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It could have been nothing. Houses make noise all the time, right? But then I heard it again, louder this time, unmistakable. Someone was in my house. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, ready to call 911. But before I could dial, my bedroom door slowly began to open. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed, ready to spring into action. The door swung open, revealing nothing, just the dark hallway beyond. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all, that the stress and lack of sleep had finally made me crack. But then I saw it, a shadow, moving across my bedroom floor. I tracked its progress with wide eyes, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. The shadow stopped at the foot of my bed, and slowly, so slowly, began to rise. It took shape, forming into a tall, familiar silhouette. Him. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just lay there, paralyzed, as he loomed over me. In the dim light filtering through my curtains, I could just make out the glint in his eyes, the twist of his mouth. "Hello, neighbor," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I think it's time we had a proper introduction, don't you?" I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch as he reached into his pocket, pulling out something that caught the light. A knife. "You see," he continued, running his finger along the blade, "I've been watching you for a while now, learning your habits, your routines. It's amazing what you can learn about a person just by observing." He took a step closer, and I could smell him now, a mix of sweat and something metallic, like blood. But observation can only tell you so much. To really know someone, you have to get closer. The knife hovered inches from my face, and I could see my terrified reflection in its polished surface. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But just as the tip of the blade touched my cheek, a bright light flooded the room. Car headlights, sweeping across my windows as a vehicle turned onto our street. The sudden illumination seemed to startle him, and he took a step back, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening I needed. With a surge of adrenaline, I launched myself out of bed, shoving past him with all my strength. He stumbled, caught off guard, and I heard the knife clatter to the floor. I didn't look back, just ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps thundering down the steps. My lungs burned as I sprinted for the front door, fumbling with the lock with shaking hands. Just as I got it open, I felt his hand close around my arm, yanking me back. "No!" I screamed, twisting in his grip. "Let me go!" We grappled in the doorway, his strength threatening to overpower me. But desperation lent me strength I didn't know I had. I clawed at his face, my nails raking across his cheek. He howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I burst out onto my front lawn, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. Lights began to flick on in neighboring houses, curious faces appearing in windows. He stood in my doorway, blood trickling down his face where I'd scratched him, his eyes wild with rage. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both panting heavily. Then, as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, he turned and ran. Not back into my house, but across the street to his own. I watched, dumbfounded, as he disappeared inside, the door slamming behind him. The police arrived minutes later, finding me huddled on my front lawn, shaking uncontrollably. They listened to my story with grave expressions, immediately calling for backup to surround his house. But when they broke down his door, they found nothing. The house was completely empty, no furniture, no personal belongings. Nothing to indicate anyone had ever lived there at all. I insisted that I hadn't imagined it, showing them the scratches on my arm where he'd grabbed me. They believed me. The signs of a struggle in my house were clear, but they were baffled. How could someone just vanish like that? As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, I watched the police comb through his house. They found no trace of him, No clue to his identity or where he might have gone. It was like he had never existed, but I knew he had. I could still feel his eyes on me, still smell that metallic scent. And as I looked up at his empty house, a chill ran down my spine. Because there, in the upstairs window, I saw a curtain twitch, just slightly, just enough. He was still watching, and I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house next door stood silent and dark, keeping its secrets, for now. But somewhere out there, my neighbor was waiting, watching. And I knew that one day, when I least expected it, he would be back to finish what he started. The forest was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it became my prison. I've always been a solitary person, preferring the company of trees and wildlife to the chaos of city life. So when the stress of my job started to overwhelm me, I knew exactly what I needed. A solo camping trip deep in the wilderness. Just me, my tent, and the great outdoors. If only I'd known what was waiting for me out there. The hike-in was beautiful. Autumn had painted the forest in a riot of reds and golds, and the crisp air filled my lungs with each breath. As I trekked deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was perfect. I found an ideal spot to set up camp just as the sun was starting to dip below the tree line. A small clearing next to a babbling stream, sheltered by a stand of old-growth pines. I pitched my tent with practiced ease, gathered some firewood, and settled in for the evening. As night fell, I sat by my campfire, watching the flames dance and listening to the forest around me. The moon was full, casting an ethereal glow through the branches overhead. I felt the tension of the past few months melting away. This, I thought, was exactly what I needed. If only I'd known how wrong I was. The first sign that something was off came just after midnight. I'd been dozing lightly in my tent when a sound jolted me awake. It was hard to place at first. A sort of scraping, mixed with what almost sounded like whispers. I sat up, straining my ears. There it was again. Closer this time. My heart rate picked up as I unzipped the tent flap, peering out into the moonlit clearing. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just shadows and silver light. But then, movement caught my eye. Something was moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Something big. I held my breath, watching as a dark shape seemed to detach itself from the shadows. It moved in a way that was wrong. Not quite human, not quite animal. Just wrong. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone, melting back into the darkness of the forest. I sat there for what felt like hours, eyes fixed on that spot, barely daring to breathe. But nothing else emerged. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I managed to drift into an uneasy sleep. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear or a deer. Nothing to worry about. The forest plays tricks on you at night, after all. But when I woke the next morning, I knew it hadn't been my imagination. The first thing I noticed was the smell. A rank, musty odor that hadn't been there the night before. It reminded me of wet fur and something rotting. I unzipped my tent with shaking hands, dreading what I might find. The clearing looked different in the harsh light of day. Branches had been broken on the trees surrounding my campsite, far too high up to have been done by any normal animal. Deep gouges marred the trunks, like something with massive claws had been sharpening them. But it was what I found around my tent that truly chilled me to the bone. Footprints. Dozens of them, circling my tent. They were huge, easily twice the size of my own feet, with long, curved claw marks at the ends of each toe. They hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep. Whatever had made those prints had been inches from me while I slept. My instincts screamed at me to pack up and get out of there. But a quick check of my phone showed no signal, and I knew I was at least a day's hike from the nearest road. I was stuck, at least until I could make it back to civilization. I spent the day in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every sound and shadow. I tried to convince myself that it was just some large animal, maybe a bear that had gotten curious about my campsite. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Bears don't leave footprints like that. Bears don't move the way that thing had moved. As the sun began to set, my anxiety ratcheted up to almost unbearable levels. I didn't want to be there when night fell again, but I had no choice. I was too far from safety to risk hiking out in the dark. I built my fire up bigger than the night before, hoping it would keep whatever was out there at bay. As the flames crackled and popped, I huddled close, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement, just at the edge of the firelight. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. For a moment, I thought I saw a face peering out at me from behind a tree, but it was like no face I'd ever seen before. Elongated, with eyes that reflected the firelight like a cat's. And the teeth. God, the teeth. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. Sleep was out of the question. I stayed up all night, feeding the fire and watching the shadows. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement, or hear that strange scraping sound again. But whatever was out there kept its distance, content to watch and wait. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but alive, and more determined than ever to get out of there. I packed up my camp in record time, not bothering to be neat or thorough. I just wanted to be gone. As I shouldered my backpack and prepared to leave, something on the ground caught my eye. There, half hidden under a fallen leaf, was a small, polished stone. I wouldn't have noticed it if the sun hadn't glinted off its surface. Curious despite my fear, I picked it up. It was smooth and black, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Symbols that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this was no natural formation. Someone or something had left this here deliberately. I dropped the stone like it had burned me and started walking, my pace just short of a run. I didn't know what that thing was or what it meant, but I knew I didn't want any part of it. The hike back was a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Every snapping twig made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide some lurking threat. I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me more than once, but when I turned to look, there was never anything there. It wasn't until I reached the trailhead and saw my car that I allowed myself to relax slightly. I was safe. I had made it out, or so I thought. It's been 3 weeks since that camping trip, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'll catch a glimpse of something moving just out of sight. When I turn to look, it's gone. I've been having dreams too. Terrible dreams of running through an endless forest, pursued by something I can't see but can feel getting closer with every step. I wake up drenched in sweat, the scent of wet fur and decay lingering in my nostrils. But the worst part, the part that makes me think I might truly be losing my mind. This morning, I found something on my doorstep. A small, polished black stone, with shifting symbols etched on its surface, identical to the one I'd found in the forest. I don't know how it got there. I don't know what it means, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that whatever I encountered in those woods has followed me home. And I'm afraid that next time, a campfire won't be enough to keep it at bay. The forest was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it brought something back with me. Something that's watching, waiting. And I don't think it's going to leave me alone until it gets what it wants. The moment I saw his smile, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. I'd been driving for hours. The monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights catching a road sign or the eyes of some nocturnal creature. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and fatigue was starting to set in. I should have stopped at that motel a few miles back, but I was determined to make it home tonight. That determination would prove to be my undoing. It started with a sputter, then a cough from the engine. I frowned, tapping the fuel gauge with my finger. It read half full, but something was clearly wrong. The car lurched, then began to slow, no matter how hard I pressed the accelerator. No, 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 I muttered, guiding the failing vehicle to the shoulder of the road. With a final, pathetic wheeze, the engine died completely. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, as if sheer willpower could restart the car. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and my own ragged breathing. Pulling out my phone, I cursed under my breath. No signal. Of course. I popped the hood and got out, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. I shined my phone's flashlight into the engine compartment, but it may as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense it made to me. I'm no mechanic, and in that moment, I'd never felt more helpless. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me. Another car meant help, or at least the possibility of a ride to the nearest town. I waved my arms, hoping to catch the driver's attention. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, I could see now, slowed as it approached. It pulled up behind me, headlights bathing my broken-down car in harsh light. I squinted, trying to make out the driver, but could only see a silhouette. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt and worn jeans. As he approached, I could see he was older, maybe in his 50s, Rulan with graying hair and a scruffy beard. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly but not unkind. I nodded, gesturing helplessly at the open hood. "Yeah, it just died on me. I don't suppose you know anything about engines." He chuckled, moving past me to peer into the engine compartment. "I've been known to tinker now and then. Let's take a look." I watched as he leaned in, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who knew what they were doing. After a few minutes, he straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Well, good news and bad news," he said, turning to face me. "Good news is, I think I know what's wrong. Bad news is, it's not something I can fix here on the side of the road." My heart sank. "So what do I do?" He seemed to consider for a moment, then said, "Tell you what, I can give you a tow to my place. I've got a workshop there. We can take a proper look in the morning. It's not far." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be cautious of strangers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did I have? "That's really kind of you," I said slowly. "Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" That's when he smiled, and something in my gut twisted. It wasn't an unkind smile, not exactly. But there was something off about it. Something that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No trouble at all," he said, still smiling that unsettling smile. Always happy to help a stranger in need. Before I could respond, he was already moving to hook up my car to his truck. I stood there, torn between relief at the offer of help and a growing sense of unease. As we set off down the dark highway, me in the passenger seat of his truck, my car trailing behind us, I tried to shake off my nerves. He was just being kind, I told myself. Not everyone has ulterior motives. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine and the occasional crackle of the old radio. I watched the trees blur past outside the window, trying to gauge how far we'd traveled. "So," he said suddenly, making me jump slightly, "what brings you out this way so late?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just heading home from a business trip. Probably should have stopped for the night, but I was eager to get back." He nodded, his eyes never leaving the road. "Family waiting for you?" "No," I said, then immediately regretted it. Why had I told him that? I mean, not immediately. My parents live nearby. He made a non-committal sound, and we lapsed back into silence. I found myself glancing at him more frequently, noting the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the set of his jaw. Everything about him seemed tense, coiled, like a spring ready to snap. We turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved track. The truck bounced and jolted as we made our way deeper into the woods. My unease grew with each passing minute. It's, pretty remote out here, I said, trying to keep my voice light. He glanced at me, that unsettling smile back on his face. I like my privacy. Finally, we pulled up to a small, ramshackle house. A detached garage stood off to one side, old car parts and rusty tools scattered around it. The whole scene was illuminated by a single, flickering porch light. "Home sweet home," he said, killing the engine. As we got out of the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. Everything about this situation felt wrong. "The workshop's round back," and he said, gesturing for me to follow him. "We'll get your car settled, then you can bunk down for the night. I've got a spare room." I followed him around the side of the house, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he must be able to hear it. As we rounded the corner, I saw not a workshop, but a cellar door set into the ground. He must have sensed my hesitation because he turned, fixing me with those cold eyes. "Something wrong?" I swallowed hard, taking a step back. I think maybe I should just call a tow truck. If you could let me use your phone." His hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. Now, he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't be rude. I brought you all this way. Least you could do is come take a look at my workshop." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me." His other hand came up, and I saw the glint of metal. A knife. My blood ran cold. "I really wish you hadn't noticed," he said, almost sadly. "The polite ones are so much easier. They just follow along right into the cellar, but you had to be difficult." I reacted on pure instinct, bringing my knee up hard between his legs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I ran, not caring which direction, just needing to get away. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, shouting obscenities. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. Finally, I broke through the tree line and found myself on a road. A real, paved road. In the distance, I could see lights, a gas station maybe, or a diner. Civilization, safety. I started walking, then jogging, then running again, spurred on by the memory of his cold eyes and that terrible smile. As I reached the lights, a 24-hour diner, as it turned out, I finally allowed myself to stop, to breathe. I burst through the doors, startling the lone waitress behind the counter. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. I need to call the police." The events that followed are a blur. Police statements, hospital checks, the eventual recovery of my car, abandoned by the side of the highway where I'd broken down. They never found him, or his house in the woods. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, taking all evidence of his existence with him. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a pickup truck on the highway, or see a man with graying hair and a scruffy beard, and my heart will race. I don't drive alone at night anymore. I don't take help from strangers, and I'll never forget the lesson I learned on that dark, lonely stretch of highway. Sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones that lurk in the dark. Sometimes, they're the ones that offer you a helping hand and a friendly smile. And by the time you realize the truth, it's already too late. The darkness was absolute. In that moment, I realized how much we take light for granted. It had been a long day at work, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. I'd just settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and my favorite book when the lights flickered once, twice mine, and then went out completely. The sudden silence was deafening. No hum of the refrigerator, no whir of the air conditioning, just nothing. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to navigate to the kitchen where I kept a flashlight, As I rummaged through the drawer, a sound made me freeze. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. Someone was trying to open my front door. My heart leapt into my throat. I lived alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. My neighbors were mostly elderly or young professionals who kept to themselves. Nobody should be at my door, especially not during a blackout. I held my breath, listening intently. There it was again, the soft scrape of metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. Panic surged through me. I looked around frantically, searching for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a heavy cast iron skillet hanging by the stove. I grabbed it, its weight oddly comforting in my trembling hands. The sound at the door stopped abruptly. For a moment, I dared to hope that whoever it was had given up and left. But then I heard a soft thud, followed by the creak of my door slowly opening. I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, trying to control my ragged breathing. In the pitch darkness, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through my living room. My mind raced. Should I confront the intruder, try to slip past them and make a run for it, or stay hidden and hope they left without finding me? The decision was made for me when I heard a floorboard creak just outside the kitchen. They were coming closer. I gripped the skillet tighter, raising it above my head. As the footsteps entered the kitchen, I swung with all my might. The satisfying thunk of iron meeting flesh was followed by a grunt of pain and the sound of a body hitting the floor. Without pausing to think, I bolted for the door. I made it to the hallway before I realized I had no idea where I was going. The entire building was dark, and I didn't have my phone or keys. I could hear movement behind me. Whoever I'd hit was getting up. Desperation lending me speed, I ran for the stairs. I took them two at a time, one hand on the railing to guide me in the darkness. Behind me, I could hear heavy footsteps and labored breathing. They were following me. I burst through the stairwell door onto my floor, immediately regretting my decision. The hallway was a sea of blackness, indistinguishable from the abyss I just left. I had no idea which way to go. A hand grabbed my ankle, and I screamed, kicking out blindly. My foot connected with something solid, and I heard a muffled curse. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from my pursuer. My hand touched a door frame, and I pulled myself up, pounding on the door with all my might. "Help!" I screamed. "Please, somebody help me!" The sound of approaching footsteps spurred me on. I moved to the next door, then the next, pounding and screaming. Why wasn't anyone answering? Where was everyone? Just as despair was about to overwhelm me, a door creaked open. A faint voice called out, "Hello? What's going on?" Relief flooded through me. "Please," I gasped. "Let me in. Someone's after me." I felt a hand grasp my arm, pulling me into the apartment. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the click of a lock engaging. "Are you all right?" The voice belonged to an elderly woman. I could just make out her silhouette in the dim light coming from a battery-powered lantern on a nearby table. Before I could answer, a fist pounded on the door. Both of us jumped. "Open up!" A gruff voice demanded. "Police!" My blood ran cold. Police? But how? The old woman moved towards the door, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait," I whispered. "I don't think they're really police." She hesitated, then nodded. "Who is it?" she called out. "Ma'am, this is the police. We're investigating a disturbance. Please open the door." The woman looked at me, uncertainty clear in her eyes. I shook my head vehemently. "I'm sorry," she called back, "but I can't see anything." "How do I know you're really the police?" There was a pause, then the sound of something sliding under the door. The old woman bent down and picked up what looked like a badge. My heart sank. Maybe I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I had attacked a real police officer in my panic. The woman studied the badge, then looked at me. "It looks real," she whispered. I nodded, defeat washing over me. "Okay," I said softly. Open it. As she reached for the lock, a thought struck me. Wait, I hissed. Ask him something only a real cop would know. She nodded, then called out, Officer, what's the non-emergency number for our precinct? There was a long pause. Too long. Then, ma'am, please open the door immediately or we'll be forced to break it down. The old woman's eyes widened in realization. She backed away from the door, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards what I assumed was her bedroom. The pounding on the door intensified, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. They were breaking in. We huddled in the bedroom, the old woman fumbling with her cell phone. I'm calling 911, she whispered. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door. I could hear them in the apartment now, overturning furniture, getting closer. The old woman's hushed voice seemed impossibly loud as she spoke to the 911 operator. I prayed it wouldn't give away our location. The bedroom door burst open. Two figures stood silhouetted against the faint light from the living room. One was tall and broad, the other shorter but stocky. Neither looked like any police officer I'd ever seen. Well, the taller one said, his voice the same gruff one from earlier. Looks like we found ourselves a little party. The old woman screamed, dropping her phone. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything to defend ourselves with. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the room. We all froze, momentarily stunned. Police! Don't move! Real police officers poured into the room, quickly subduing the two intruders. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I saw that power had been restored to the building. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and paramedic checkups. It turned out the two men were part of a gang that had been taking advantage of blackouts to rob apartments. They had been posing as police officers to gain entry. As I sat on the back of an ambulance and a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly everything had changed. One moment, I had been enjoying a quiet evening at home. The next, I was fighting for my life in the dark. The elderly woman, Mrs. Chen, I learned, came over to check on me. Are you all right, dear? She asked, patting my hand. I nodded, managing a weak smile. Thanks to you, I said. If you hadn't let me in. She waved off my thanks. You would have done the same for me. That's what neighbors are for. As I watched the police cars drive away, their lights painting the street in flashes of red and blue, I realized something. The darkness hadn't just been about the lack of light. It had been about the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being utterly alone. But even in that darkness, there had been a glimmer of light, the kindness of a stranger, the courage to fight back, the hope that help would come. I may never feel completely safe in the dark again. But I'll always remember that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for light to break through. You just have to be brave enough to look for it. The camera was so small I almost missed it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee the truth. Our perfect vacation had become a nightmare. It was supposed to be the getaway we'd always dreamed of. After months of overtime and penny pinching, my wife Sarah and I had finally saved enough for a week at an exclusive beachfront property. The photos online had been breathtaking. Pristine white sand, crystal clear water, and a modern villa that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When we arrived, it seemed even better than the pictures. The property manager, a friendly local named Miguel, gave us a tour, pointing out all the amenities. The infinity pool, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the massive master bedroom with its own private balcony. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with excitement. We were both thinking the same thing. This is paradise. The first couple of days were bliss. We swam in the warm ocean, lounged by the pool, and watched spectacular sunsets from our balcony. In the evenings, we'd cook dinner together in the gourmet kitchen, laughing and talking like we hadn't in years. The stress of our daily lives seemed a million miles away. It was on the third night that things started to feel off. We just finished dinner and were cleaning up when Sarah paused, a strange look on her face. "Did you hear that?" she asked, cocking her head to one side. I stopped, listening intently. At first, I heard nothing but the soft whir of the air conditioning. Then, faintly, I caught it. A low, mechanical hum. It was so quiet I might have missed it if the house wasn't so still. "Probably just the fridge," I said with a shrug. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew that wasn't it. This sound was different, almost like a camera. Sarah whispered, her eyes meeting mine. "It sounds like a camera zooming." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound had unsettled me too. We spent the next hour searching the kitchen and living room, looking for the source of the noise. We found nothing, but the unease lingered. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed sinister, every creak of the house ominous. Sarah tossed and turned beside me, clearly just as disturbed. The next morning, we tried to put it behind us. We were being paranoid, we told ourselves. This was our dream vacation, we shouldn't let some weird noise ruin it. But as the day wore on, more oddities piled up. The villa, which had seemed so perfect at first, now felt subtly wrong. The artwork on the walls seemed to have shifted position slightly. Items we were sure we'd left in one place turned up in another. And always, that faint mechanical hum, just at the edge of hearing. It was when I was showering that evening that I finally saw it. As I reached for the shampoo, a glint of something metallic caught my eye. There, nestled in the decorative stonework around the showerhead, was a tiny camera lens. My blood ran cold. I stood there frozen, water cascading over me, as the full implications hit me. If there was a camera here, how many others were there? How long had we been watched? And by whom? I didn't tell Sarah immediately. I needed to be sure. So while she was reading on the balcony, I did a thorough sweep of the house. What I found made me sick to my stomach. They were everywhere. Tiny cameras hidden in light fixtures, behind air vents, even in the digital clock by our bed. Our entire stay had been recorded, every private moment exposed. When I finally told Sarah, she went pale. "We have to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Now." But as we started to pack, a new, horrifying thought struck me. What if they didn't want us to leave? What if whoever was behind this decided to stop us? As if in answer to my unspoken fear, we heard the front door open downstairs. Footsteps echoed through the house, too heavy to be Miguel's. Sarah's eyes widened in panic. I put a finger to my lips, then pointed to the balcony. She nodded, understanding. As quietly as we could, we slipped outside and climbed down the trellis to the beach below. We ran along the shoreline, the soft sand making our progress agonizingly slow. Behind us, I heard shouts from the villa. They'd discovered we were gone. "There," Sarah gasped, pointing to a small boathouse further down the beach. We sprinted towards it, desperation lending us speed. The boathouse was unlocked, thank God. We slipped inside, our eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. The smell of salt water and old wood filled my nostrils as I fumbled for something, anything we could use to defend ourselves. My hand closed around what felt like an oar just as the boathouse door burst open. A large man filled the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. Now, he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Let's not do anything hasty. Why don't you come back to the house? We can talk about this." "Stay back," I shouted, brandishing the oar. Sarah pressed against me, trembling. The man sighed, as if we were misbehaving children. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, you've witnessed something you shouldn't have. We can't just let you leave." He took a step forward. I swung the oar with all my might, connecting solidly with his shoulder. He grunted in pain and stumbled back, giving us the opening we needed. We burst out of the boathouse, running blindly down the beach. I could hear pursuit behind us, shouts and the sound of running feet. Up ahead, I saw lights. Another villa, This one occupied. Our only chance. We pounded on the door, gasping for breath. An older couple opened up, their eyes widening at our disheveled appearance. "Please," Sarah managed between gulps of air. "We need help. Someone's after us." The couple ushered us inside, locking the door behind us. The woman, introducing herself as Linda, sat us down while her husband Tom called the police. As we waited, huddled on their couch, I could see figures moving on the beach outside. They lingered for a while, then melted away into the darkness as the sound of sirens approached. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and questions. It turned out we weren't the first victims. The villa had been used for years to spy on unsuspecting vacationers. The footage sold to the highest bidder on the dark web. Miguel, the property manager, was arrested. He'd been the inside man, setting up the cameras and managing the technical side of things. The man who'd chased us was never caught. As we sat in the police station, waiting for our flight home to be arranged, Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "I keep thinking," she said softly, "about all the moments we had there. Our talks, our laughter, even our intimate moments. None of it was really ours, was it? They stole it all?" I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "No," I said firmly. "They might have recorded it, but they can't take the memories from us. Those are ours always." She nodded, but I could feel her trembling against me. I knew it would be a long time before either of us felt truly safe again. As we boarded our flight home the next day, I couldn't help but glance back at the island. From up here, it still looked like paradise. But now I knew the truth. Sometimes, the most beautiful places hide the ugliest secrets. I don't know if we'll ever take another vacation like that. The trust we once had in the world has been shaken to its core. But as I sat there, holding Sarah's hand as the plane took off, I made a silent promise. Whatever came next, whatever challenges we faced, we would face them together. They might have stolen our privacy, but they couldn't steal our love. And in the end, that's the one thing no camera can ever truly capture. I never thought a simple brown package could change my life forever. But as I stood there, holding the unmarked parcel, I had no idea of the danger I had just invited into my life. It was supposed to be a routine business trip. 3 days in a mid-range hotel, attending a conference I'd been to a dozen times before. Nothing exciting, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another blip in the monotony of my corporate existence. I checked in late, the sun already setting as I dragged my suitcase down the carpeted hallway to my room. The key card beeped, the lock clicked, and I pushed open the door, ready to collapse onto the bed and order room service. That's when I saw it. A small, brown package, sitting innocuously on the floor just inside the doorway. At first, I thought nothing of it. Probably just some hotel promotional material, I figured. But as I bent to pick it up, a chill ran down my spine. The package wasn't addressed to the room number or to guest. It had a name on it, a name that wasn't mine. I stood there, package in hand, suddenly unsure of what to do. Should I take it to the front desk? Leave it where I found it? My curiosity warred with my sense of propriety. Curiosity won. I set my suitcase down and closed the door, then carried the package over to the desk. It was light. Whatever was inside couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. There was no return address, just the name, Michael Brennan. I don't know what possessed me to open it. Maybe it was the long day of travel, or the 3 cups of coffee I'd had on the plane. Maybe it was just that nagging sense of wanting to know, to solve the mystery. Whatever the reason, I found myself carefully peeling back the brown paper, revealing a plain white envelope underneath. My heart was pounding as I slid my finger under the flap, breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small USB drive. The paper was covered in what looked like random strings of numbers and letters. Some kind of code, maybe. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. The USB drive was equally nondescript, Just a basic black stick with no identifying marks. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the contents of the envelope. This clearly wasn't meant for me. I should take it to the front desk, explain the mix-up. That would be the right thing to do. Instead, I found myself reaching for my laptop. I told myself I was just going to check if there was any identifying information on the drive. Something that would help me return it to its rightful owner. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. As soon as I plugged in the drive, a window popped up. Files upon files, all with names that meant nothing to me. TPS 2207, Doc, Atlas Final, PDF, IMG Zozo98, JPG. My cursor hovered over one of the document files. Just one look, I told myself, just to see what this is all about. I double-clicked. The document that opened made my blood run cold. It was some kind of financial report, but the numbers, they were astronomical. Billions of dollars, moving between accounts I'd never heard of. And at the bottom, a name I did recognize, Senator James McAllister. My mind was reeling. What was this? Some kind of secret slush fund? Evidence of corruption? I opened another file, then another. Each one revealed more damning information. Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribes paid and received. It was like stumbling into the middle of a massive conspiracy. I was so engrossed in what I was reading that I almost missed the sound. A soft click, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. But it was enough to make me freeze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Someone was at the door. I snapped the laptop shut and yanked out the USB drive, shoving it and the envelope into my pocket. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door handle jiggled. Then came a knock, firm and insistent. Housekeeping. A voice called out, but something about it didn't sound right. Too gruff, too forceful for a hotel maid. I didn't respond, hoping they'd think the room was empty and move on. But the knocking came again, louder this time. "Open up," the voice demanded, all pretense of being housekeeping gone. "We know you're in there." Panic surged through me. Who were they? How did they know I had the package? My eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route. The window. No. I was on the 10th floor. The bathroom. A dead end. The sound of a key card being swiped made my decision for me. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted for the closet, squeezing myself inside just as the door burst open. Through the slats in the closet door, I could see two men enter the room. They were dressed casually, but something about their postures screamed dangerous. One of them immediately went to the desk where my laptop still sat. "It's been accessed," he said, his voice low and angry. The other man cursed. "Search the room. He can't have gone far." I held my breath as they tore through the place, checking under the bed, in the bathroom, even on the balcony. I was sure they would find me at any moment, my thundering heartbeat giving me away. But somehow, miraculously, they didn't check the closet. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard them leave, the door slamming behind them. I waited another agonizing 5 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally emerged from the closet, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I knew I couldn't stay here. Whoever those men were, they'd be back. I had to get out, had to find somewhere safe. But where? I was in a strange city, with no idea who I could trust. For all I knew, the hotel staff were in on it. The police. But what if they were corrupt too? My mind raced as I grabbed my things and slipped out of the room. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, paranoid about being trapped in a small space. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a potential threat. I made it to the lobby without incident, trying to look casual as I walked briskly toward the exit. I was almost there when I heard a shout behind me. "There he is." I didn't look back. I just ran. Out into the street, dodging pedestrians and ignoring angry honks from cars as I darted through traffic. I had no plan, no destination in mind. I just knew I had to keep moving. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, I ducked into an alley, leaning against a wall as I gasped for breath. What had I gotten myself into? As my breathing slowed, I realized I still had the USB drive and the coded paper in my pocket. Whatever was on here, it was big enough that people were willing to kill for it. I couldn't go to the police one night without knowing who I could trust. I couldn't go home. That would be the first place they'd look. I needed help. But from who? Then it hit me. My college roommate, Alex. He worked in cybersecurity now. If anyone could make sense of what was on this drive, it would be him. I found a 24-hour internet cafe and sent Alex an encrypted message, using a code we'd made up in college. Then I bought a burner phone and a bus ticket to his city. As I sat on the bus watching the city lights fade into the distance, I couldn't help but wonder how my life had changed so drastically in just a few hours. This morning, I was a normal guy on a boring business trip. Now I was on the run, carrying secrets that people would kill for. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to go back to my old life. But I did know one thing. I was in this now, for better or worse. And I had to see it through to the end. The package that wasn't meant for me had become my responsibility. And somehow, some way, I had to figure out what to do with it. As the bus rolled on through the night, I clutched my bag close, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. It felt like it weighed a ton, this tiny piece of plastic that had turned my world upside down. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The moment I realized we weren't heading to my destination, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. It had been a long day at the office. One of those soul-crushing shifts where everything that could go wrong did. By the time I finally clocked out, it was well past midnight, and I was exhausted. The thought of navigating the labyrinthine public transit system at this hour was too much to bear. So I did what any sensible person would do in 2023. I opened my rideshare app and requested a car. The app chirped cheerfully, informing me that my driver, a man named Carlos, would be arriving in a blue sedan in just 3 minutes. I waited on the curb, the cool night air helping to clear some of the fog from my brain. Right on time, a car matching the description pulled up. I double-checked the license plate against the app. It matched. So far, so good. Evening, the driver said as I slid into the back seat. Long night? I mumbled an affirmative. Too tired for small talk. He nodded in understanding and pulled away from the curb. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city lights blur past, looking forward to falling into my bed. It wasn't until about 10 minutes into the ride that I started to feel something was off. The route we were taking didn't seem familiar. I sat up straighter, peering out the window, trying to orient myself. "Belf." "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet car. "I think we might be going the wrong way." The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. In the dim light, I couldn't quite make out his expression. "Just taking a shortcut," he said smoothly. "Don't worry, I know these streets like the back of my hand." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I pulled out my phone, intending to check the route on my map app. That's when I noticed I had no signal. My heart rate kicked up a notch. I tried to remain calm, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as the unfamiliar streets continued to roll by, my unease grew. "I really think we're going the wrong way," I said more firmly this time. "Could you please just follow the GPS?" He didn't respond. Instead, he reached over and pressed a button. I heard the ominous click of the doors locking. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. This was the stuff of urban legends, not real life, not my life. "Let me out," I demanded, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound authoritative. "Stop the car right now." He laughed, a low, unsettling sound that made my blood run cold. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, all pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. We've got somewhere to be, you and I. I lunged for the door handle, yanking it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. The child safety locks were engaged. I was trapped. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I could try to grab the steering wheel, force us off the road. But at the speed we were going, that would likely end badly for both of us. I could scream, try to attract attention from other drivers or pedestrians, but we were now in an industrial area, the streets deserted at this late hour. I felt in my pockets, desperate for anything I could use as a weapon. My keys, my phone, a pen from work. All seemed woefully inadequate against a man who clearly had the upper hand. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe if I could get him talking, I could find a way to reason with him. He chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Curious, aren't you? Don't worry, you'll find out soon enough." We were leaving the city now, the buildings giving way to open fields and scattered trees. My chances of escape were dwindling with every passing mile. In a last-ditch effort, I decided to try appealing to his humanity. "Please," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice but too desperate to care. "I have a family. People will be looking for me." For a moment, I thought I saw his expression soften in the rearview mirror. But then, his face hardened again. "Should have thought of that before, shouldn't you?" "Before what?" I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I possibly have done to deserve this? As if reading my thoughts, he spoke again. "You people, you think you can just go about your lives, never considering the consequences of your actions. Well, tonight's the night those consequences catch up with you." My mind whirled, trying to make sense of his words. What actions? What consequences? I was just an ordinary person, living an ordinary life. I hadn't done anything to warrant this. Or had I? In my panic, my mind started conjuring up every minor transgression, every small act of unkindness I'd ever committed. Had I cut someone off in traffic without realizing? Said something insensitive that I'd forgotten about? Was this some sort of cosmic retribution for all my small sins? The rational part of my brain knew this was ridiculous. Whatever was happening, it wasn't about karma or cosmic justice. This man was disturbed, dangerous, and I was in very real peril. We had been driving for what felt like hours, though my watch told me it had only been about 45 minutes. The landscape outside had changed, becoming more rugged, more isolated. We were climbing now, the road winding up into hills I didn't recognize. Suddenly, the car slowed, turning onto a dirt road barely visible in the gloom. My heart, which had been racing the entire time, now felt like it might burst out of my chest. This was it. Whatever he had planned for me, we had reached our destination. The car came to a stop in front of what looked like an old barn. The driver turned off the engine and for a moment, we sat in total silence. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the confined space. "We're here," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "Now, you're going to get out of the car, nice and slow. Any sudden moves, and things will get very unpleasant for you. Understand?" I nodded mutely, my mouth too dry to speak. He got out first, then opened my door. As I stepped out on shaky legs, the cool night air hit me like a slap. It made everything feel more real, more immediate. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was happening. He gripped my arm, his fingers digging in painfully as he steered me towards the barn. The door creaked ominously as he pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black. I could smell damp earth and moldering hay. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out shapes, old farm equipment, stacks of crates, and something else. Something that looked disturbingly like a chair with restraints. "Sit," he commanded, shoving me towards the chair. As he busied himself with securing my wrists and ankles, my mind was working overtime. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to croak out. He paused in his work, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. Was it anger? Sadness? Regret? Because someone has to, he said finally. Someone has to make you all see. See what? I asked, desperate to keep him talking, to delay whatever he had planned. He stepped back, regarding me silently for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo. He held it up in front of my face. It was a picture of a young woman, smiling at the camera. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. "This is my daughter," he said, his voice tight with emotion. Or rather, this was my daughter. She's dead now, killed by a drunk driver who was using a ride-share app. The pieces started to fall into place. The familiar face in the photo. I had seen it on the news months ago. A tragic accident, they had called it. But it wasn't the driver's fault, not really. He continued, it was the company's. They knew he had a history of DUIs, but they let him drive anyway. And people like you just keep using these apps, never thinking about the risks, never holding them accountable. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but what could I say? He wasn't entirely wrong. We all knew the risks, but we chose convenience over safety every day. "So now," he said, his voice hardening, "you're going to help me send a message. We're going to make them see, make them understand the true cost of their negligence." As he turned away, presumably to get whatever tools he planned to use for his twisted message, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was my last chance. I threw my weight to the side, toppling the chair. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through my body, but I ignored it, focusing on the sound I had heard, the crack of old, dry wood giving way. One of the chair legs had broken. My left hand was free. He whirled around at the noise, but I was already moving. I yanked my hand free of the loosened restraint and grabbed the broken chair leg. As he lunged towards me, I swung with all my might. The wood connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground, motionless. With shaking hands, I managed to free myself from the remaining restraints. I checked his pulse, still alive, but unconscious. I didn't know how long it would last. I ran to his car, thanking whatever deity might be listening that he had left the keys in the ignition. As I sped down the dirt road, I finally got a signal on my phone. I called 911, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what had happened, where I was. It wasn't until I saw the flashing lights of the police cars that I finally let myself break down. The tears came in great, heaving sobs as the reality of what I had just escaped hit me. As I gave my statement to the police, I couldn't help but think about the man's words, about consequences and accountability, about the choices we make every day without thinking. I knew that after tonight I would never be the same. I would never again take my safety for granted, and I would never forget how close I came to becoming just another statistic, another tragic story on the evening news. The ride that was supposed to take me home had instead taken me on a journey to the darkest edges of humanity, and back. And now, as I watched the sun begin to rise, I knew I had been given a second chance. A chance to live more consciously, more responsibly. A chance I was determined not to waste. The moment I saw the flickering screen, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was already too late to turn back. It was just another late night at the office, or so I thought. As a junior analyst at Crimson Global, a multinational corporation with its fingers in every pie from tech to pharmaceuticals, burning the midnight oil was practically part of my job description. But this night was different. This night would change everything. I'd been poring over quarterly reports for hours, my eyes strained and my brain fuzzy from the endless parade of numbers. The office was eerily quiet. The usual bustle of the day replaced by the soft hum of computers and the occasional distant sound of the cleaning crew. I decided to take a break, stretching my arms above my head and yawning widely. That's when I noticed it. A faint, irregular flashing coming from the security office down the hall. Curious, and glad for any distraction from my mind-numbing task, I decided to investigate. The security office door was ajar, which was odd in itself. As I approached, I could see the bank of monitors inside. each showing a different part of the building. But one screen kept flickering, switching rapidly between different camera feeds. I stepped inside, my eyes fixed on the malfunctioning monitor. As I watched, the images began to slow, and I realized with a start that I was looking at the executive floor, an area my security clearance definitely didn't cover. I knew I should leave, report the glitch to IT, and go back to my spreadsheets. But something held me there. My gaze locked on the screen as it cycled through views of plush offices and restricted labs. And then I saw it. In one of the labs, a figure moved furtively between benches laden with equipment. This wasn't a cleaner or a late-working scientist. Their movements were too hurried, too secretive. My heart began to race. Was I witnessing a break-in? Corporate espionage? I should call security, I thought. But as I reached for my phone, the figure on screen turned, and I caught a glimpse of their face. I felt the blood drain from my face. I recognized him. It was Dr. Emerson, head of our biotech division. What was he doing sneaking around his own lab in the middle of the night? As I watched, Dr. Emerson retrieved something from a locked cabinet, a small vial filled with dark liquid. He slipped it into his pocket, then began rapidly typing on one of the computers. I was so engrossed in the scene unfolding before me that I almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind. Almost. I whirled around, my heart in my throat, to find myself face to face with Dave, one of the night security guards. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice gruff with suspicion. I stammered out an explanation about seeing the flickering screen, trying to keep my voice steady. Dave's eyes narrowed as he looked past me at the monitors. "That camera's not supposed to be accessible from this terminal," he muttered, pushing past me to examine the system. As Dave fiddled with the controls, I saw Dr. Emerson finish whatever he was doing and hurry out of the lab, the evidence of whatever he'd been up to disappearing with him. Dave finally got the system reset, the executive floor camera feed disappearing from the screens. He turned back to me, his expression stern. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. "These systems are restricted for a reason. I'm going to have to report this." I nodded, trying to look appropriately chastened while my mind raced. Should I tell him what I'd seen? But what exactly had I seen? A senior executive accessing his own lab wasn't exactly a smoking gun. And if I was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation, reporting it would be career suicide. I mumbled an apology and slipped out of the security office, my thoughts in turmoil. As I walked back to my desk, I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Why would Dr. Emerson need to sneak into his own lab? What was in that vial? And why did he look so guilty? I couldn't focus on my work after that. The numbers on my screen blurred as my mind kept replaying the scene I'd witnessed. I needed to know more. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to office gossip, particularly anything related to the biotech division. I casually asked colleagues about Dr. Emerson, framing my questions as simple curiosity about the company's top brass. What I learned only deepened the mystery. Dr. Emerson had been acting strangely for weeks, canceling meetings, snapping at subordinates, looking haggard and stressed. Some speculated he was cracking under the pressure of an important project deadline. Others whispered about personal problems, a messy divorce in the works. But none of it explained what I'd seen that night. A week after the incident, I was working late again when I overheard a heated conversation from a nearby conference room. I recognized Dr. Emerson's voice, raised in anger. "You can't do this," he was saying. "Do you have any idea what's at stake?" A cooler voice responded, one I recognized as belonging to our CEO, Victoria Hardwick. "I know exactly what's at stake, Richard. That's why this stops now. You've gone too far." There was a sound of something slamming, a hand on a table perhaps, and then Dr. Emerson stormed out of the room. He was so preoccupied he didn't even notice me shrinking back into the shadows of my cubicle. My curiosity was now a raging inferno. What was going on? What had Dr. Emerson done that was so terrible even our notoriously ruthless CEO was putting a stop to it? I made a decision then, one that I knew could cost me my job or worse. I was going to find out the truth. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor, making sure to volunteer for any tasks that might give me access to more sensitive information. I started coming in early and staying late, using the quiet hours to do some discreet snooping. It was during one of these late-night investigations that I finally hit pay dirt. I'd managed to get into the biotech division's file server. Thank you. Carelessly scribbled password on a post-it note, and was combing through recent reports when I found it. Project Lazarus. The file was heavily encrypted, but from what I could piece together, it was some kind of radical life extension therapy. The potential applications and profits were staggering. But as I dug deeper, my excitement turned to horror. The trials had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. Test subjects had experienced rapid aging, cognitive decline, and in some cases, death. But instead of shutting down the project, Dr. Emerson had pushed forward, falsifying data and covering up the failures. And worse, he'd started testing on human subjects. Vulnerable people, the homeless, undocumented immigrants, people who wouldn't be missed, people who had died horrible deaths in the name of scientific progress and corporate greed. I felt sick. This was beyond corporate malfeasance. This was a crime against humanity. I was so engrossed in the files that I didn't hear the door open behind me. It wasn't until I felt the hand on my shoulder that I realized I wasn't alone. I spun around, my heart pounding, to find myself face to face with Dr. Emerson himself. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, he said, his voice eerily calm. I really thought I could perfect it, save lives, change the world. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Dr. Emerson's eyes were wild, desperate. I saw his hand move, saw the glint of a syringe. I'm sorry, he said, and I felt a sharp prick in my neck. But I've come too far to stop now. And you? Well, you'll be helping science after all. As the world began to fade around me, my last coherent thought was of the flickering security screen that had started it all. I should have walked away. I should have minded my own business. But it was too late for that now. Far, far too late. When I woke up, I was strapped to a cold metal table in a room I didn't recognize. Dr. Emerson loomed over me, a vial of dark liquid in his hand. The same vial I'd seen him take that fateful night. Don't worry, he said, his voice sounding distant and distorted. Soon you won't remember any of this. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one, the successful trial that changes everything. As the needle approached my arm, I closed my eyes, silently cursing my curiosity, my ambition, my foolish belief that I could uncover the truth without consequences. The truth, it turns out, was far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And now, I was about to pay the ultimate price for discovering it. The cabin stood silent in the clearing, a dark sentinel against the fading light. I should have turned back then, but curiosity has always been my downfall. I'd been hiking for hours, pushing myself harder than usual to escape the chaos of my thoughts. My job, my relationship, my life. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. The wilderness had always been my refuge, a place where the complexities of the world faded away, leaving only the simple truths of survival. But as the day wore on and the familiar trails gave way to unexplored territory, I realized I'd wandered far off the beaten path. The shadows lengthened, and a chill crept into the air. That's when I saw it. A faint wisp of smoke rising above the trees. Relief washed over me. Where there was smoke, there were people. Maybe they could point me in the right direction, or at least let me warm up before I tried to find my way back. I pushed through the underbrush, ignoring the scratches from branches and thorns. The trees thinned, opening into a small clearing. And there it was, a cabin, weathered and gray, looking like it had grown straight out of the forest floor. But something felt off. The smoke I'd seen was coming from the chimney. Yet there were no lights in the windows, no sound of voices or movement. just an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Every instinct told me to turn back, to take my chances in the woods rather than approach this foreboding structure. But the temperature was dropping rapidly, and I knew I wouldn't last long in the open without proper gear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. "Is anyone there? I'm lost, and I could use some help." No response, not even a rustling curtain or a barking dog, just that oppressive silence. I took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing. The cabin loomed larger as I approached, its windows like dark, empty eyes watching my every move. The porch creaked ominously under my weight as I climbed the steps. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Hello? Please, if anyone's in there, I just need directions or a phone to call for help." Still nothing. I tried the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a long, drawn-out groan. The interior was dark, save for a faint orange glow coming from what I assumed was a dying fire in the fireplace. The smell hit me immediately, musty and damp, with an undercurrent of something sickeningly sweet, like rotting fruit, or... I pushed the thought away, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a spot in the interior. A rough wooden table, a couple of chairs, some shelves lined with jars and books. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. "Hello," I called again, softer this time. Part of me hoped for a response, while another part dreaded it. I moved deeper into the cabin, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. That's when I saw the first photograph. It was pinned to the wall, faded and yellow with age. A group of people stood in front of the cabin, smiling at the camera. But their faces... Something was wrong with their faces. They were blurred, distorted, as if someone had taken an eraser to them. My breath caught in my throat. I moved to the next photo. And the next. They were all the same. People in various poses around the cabin or in the woods, but always with those unsettling, erased faces. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding. But there was nothing there. Just shadows and dust. I knew I should leave. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get out, to take my chances in the woods. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I had to know what this place was, what had happened here. I moved towards what looked like a bedroom. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the squeal of rusty hinges. The beam of my flashlight fell on a bed, neatly made with a faded quilt. More photos covered the walls, but these were different. These showed people, normal, smiling people with clear faces. But each photo had a date written beneath it, along with two other words that made my blood run cold. Before and after. The after photos were the blurred, faceless ones I'd seen in the main room. My hands were shaking now, the flashlight beam jerking erratically across the room. What was this place? What had happened to these people? A glint of metal caught my eye. On the bedside table sat an old tape recorder, a cassette still inside. Without thinking, I pressed play. A man's voice, scratchy and distorted, filled the room. Day 47 of the experiment. Subject 12 is showing remarkable progress. The facial distortion is nearly complete, and cognitive functions are deteriorating rapidly. At this rate, we should achieve full transformation within the week. The committee will be pleased. The tape clicked off. I stood there, frozen, as the implications of what I just heard sank in. Experiment, transformation. What kind of sick game was this? I backed out of the bedroom, my mind reeling. I had to get out of here, had to tell someone about this place. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight beam fell on something that stopped me in my tracks. A mirror hung on the wall near the door, and in its reflection, I saw myself, but not as I should be. My face was blurred, distorted, just like in the photographs. I raised a hand to my cheek, feeling smooth skin where my features should be. But in the mirror, my hand passed through a smear of nothingness where my face used to be. Panic gripped me. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming, or hallucinating, or... The floorboard creaked again. But this time, when I spun around, I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows, tall and unnaturally still. As it stepped into the dim light from the dying fire, I saw that its face was a blank canvas, featureless and smooth. "Welcome," it said, its voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure advanced, its blank face somehow radiating a terrible hunger. "Don't fight it," the voice said, soothing and terrifying all at once. "The transformation is already beginning. Soon, you'll be one of us. Free from identity, free from self. Just pure, beautiful nothing." Its hand reached for me, pale fingers stretching towards my face. I felt a tugging sensation, as if my very essence was being pulled away. In that moment, survival instinct overrode fear. I ducked under its grasp and ran, slamming into the door with all my might. It burst open, and I tumbled down the porch steps, scrambling to my feet and dashing into the woods. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I could feel them behind me. A presence more sensed than seen, hungry and relentless. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. The forest blurred around me, and more than once I thought I saw faces in the trees. Blank, smooth faces watching me with invisible eyes. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the lights of my car in the parking lot, I nearly wept with relief. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sped away, my tires kicking up gravel. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a horde of faceless figures chasing after me. But there was nothing. Just the dark road and the slowly brightening sky as dawn approached. It wasn't until I got home, exhausted and shaking, that I dared to look in a mirror again. My face was there, normal and unchanged. Had it all been a hallucination? A vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion and stress? But as I stared at my reflection, I noticed something. A slight blurring around the edges of my features, almost unnoticeable. Almost. I haven't gone hiking since that night. I avoid mirrors when I can, and sometimes in my dreams I hear that voice again. "We've been waiting for you." I wake up in a cold sweat, my hands flying to my face, desperately feeling for features I'm terrified might no longer be there. So far, they always are. But I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time. The cabin in the woods is waiting. And one day, I fear, it will call me back to finish what it started. The first sign of trouble was the way they all stared. But by then, it was already too late to turn back. I'd been driving for hours. The monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional gas station or fast food joint. My GPS had died about an hour back, but I wasn't worried. The old-fashioned map spread out on the passenger seat showed a clear route to my destination. Or so I thought. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, I realized I should have reached the turnoff for the interstate by now. The landscape had changed too. Gone were the wide-open plains I'd been cruising through all afternoon. Now, rolling hills dotted with dense clusters of trees flanked the road on both sides. I was considering turning back when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 12103. Perfect, I thought. I could stop here, get my bearings, maybe grab a bite to eat. Then I'd be on my way, back on track to make it to my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner tomorrow. The main street of Millbrook looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Quaint storefronts with hand-painted signs, a small park with a gazebo, even an honest-to-God soda fountain. It was charming, in an old-fashioned sort of way. But as I cruised down Main Street, looking for a place to park, I noticed something odd. The sidewalks were empty, not just quiet, but completely deserted. And yet, I could see faces in every window watching me pass. I pulled into a spot in front of what looked like a diner and cut the engine. The silence was immediate and oppressive. No traffic noise, no chatter from pedestrians, not even the sound of birds. Just an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. As I got out of the car, I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me. Every storefront, every upper floor window seemed to hold a watcher. Their faces were expressionless, their gazes unwavering. I straightened my shoulders and tried to look confident as I walked into the diner. A bell above the door jangled, the sound jarring in the unnatural quiet. Inside, the diner was like a tableau. Half a dozen people sat at the counter and in booths, all frozen in mid-action. A waitress stood behind the counter, coffee pot suspended over a cup. An old man had a fork halfway to his mouth, and every single one of them was staring at me. Hi, I said, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. I'm a bit lost. I was hoping to get some directions. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, they all turned back to what they were doing. The waitress poured the coffee. The old man resumed eating. But there was something off about their movements, like actors who had forgotten their cues and were improvising poorly. I approached the counter, sliding onto a stool. The waitress turned to me, a rictus grin plastered on her face. "What'll it be, stranger?" she asked, her voice flat and emotionless. "Just coffee." "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. "And if you could point me towards the interstate, I'd really appreciate it." She poured the coffee without looking at the cup, her eyes never leaving my face. "Interstate?" she echoed, as if the word was foreign to her. "No interstate around here. You're in Millbrook now. Why would you want to leave?" A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around the diner, noticing for the first time that there were no clocks on the walls, no calendars, nothing to indicate the passage of time. "I'm just passing through," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee mug. "I need to get to my sister's wedding." At the word wedding, a ripple seemed to pass through the diner. Heads turned, eyes widened. The waitress's grin grew wider, if that was possible. "A wedding," she said, leaning in close. Her breath smelled of decay. "How wonderful. We love weddings here in Millbrook. When's the happy day?" "Tomorrow," I said, leaning back slightly. "In Chicago. Which is why I really need to get going." The old man at the end of the counter spoke up, his voice creaky like rusty hinges. "Chicago? That's a long way from here, boy. Why don't you stay a while? Rest up. We've got a nice hotel just down the street." I stood up, leaving the untouched coffee on the counter. "Thanks, but I really need to get going. If you could just point me in the right direction." The waitress's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Now, she said, still smiling that terrible smile. "There's no need to rush off. Millbrook is a wonderful place. You might find you want to stay. Forever." I yanked my arm free and backed towards the door. The other patrons were rising from their seats now, moving towards me with slow, deliberate steps. I burst out of the diner and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. As I looked up, I saw that the street was no longer empty. Dozens of people lined the sidewalks, all wearing the same blank expression, all moving towards me with that same eerie slowness. I finally got the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed away from the approaching crowd. Then I shifted into drive and floored it, speeding down Main Street towards what I hoped was the way out of town. In my rearview mirror, I could see them following, their pace quickening. Some had gotten into cars and were now in pursuit. I reached the edge of town, where the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign stood. But something was different. The population number was changing, ticking up slowly. 1204, 1205. With a jolt of horror, I realized it was counting me. Counting everyone who entered Millbrook and never left. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, my car protesting as I pushed it to its limits. The town fell away behind me, but I could still see headlights in my mirror. They were following, relentless. I drove through the night, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to lose my pursuers. It wasn't until the first light of dawn that I finally felt safe enough to slow down. I found myself on a major highway, surrounded by normal traffic. Billboards advertised familiar products. A sign indicated Chicago was 100 miles ahead. I nearly wept with relief. I made it to my sister's wedding. I smiled in the photos, danced at the reception, played the part of the dutiful brother. But inside, I was shaken to my core. I never told anyone about Millbrook. Who would believe me? Sometimes, I managed to convince myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination, a vivid nightmare brought on by too many hours on the road. But then I'll catch a glimpse of someone on the street. Someone with that same blank stare and mechanical movements, and my blood runs cold. I'll see a map and notice a blank spot, a place where a town should be but isn't named. And late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can hear a voice on the wind. Come back to Millbrook, it whispers. Stay with us, forever. I've moved 3 times since that night. I've changed my phone number, my email, even my name. But deep down, I know it won't matter, because Millbrook isn't just a place. It's waiting, watching. And someday, somehow, I fear it will find me again. So I keep driving, always on the move, and I never, ever take the scenic route anymore. Because you never know when you might stumble upon a town that isn't on any map. A town where the shadows are a little too long, the smiles a little too wide, and the people, well, the people aren't people at all. Remember that. If you're ever out on the road and you see a sign for a town you've never heard of, keep driving. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't stop in Millbrook, because once you're there, you might never leave. The moment I saw her eyes change, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was far too late to leave. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile. The monotony of the highway had lulled me into a sort of trance, broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights catching a road sign. It was well past midnight, and I was still hours away from my destination. That's when I saw it. A small, hand-painted sign advertising Rosewood Bed Breakfast and Next Exit. The promise of a warm bed and a break from the endless road was too tempting to resist. I took the exit, following a winding country road until I saw a large Victorian house looming in the distance, a single light glowing in an upstairs window. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The garden was overgrown, the paint on the house peeling. But it was late. I was exhausted and I'd already made the turn. Surely it couldn't be that bad for just one night. I approached the front door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Before I could knock, the door swung open, revealing a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Welcome to Rosewood," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "I'm Margaret. We've been expecting you." I blinked in surprise. Expecting me? But I didn't make a reservation. Margaret's smile never wavered. "Oh, we always have a room ready for weary travelers. Please, come in out of the cold." I hesitated for a moment, but the warmth radiating from inside was too inviting to resist. I stepped over the threshold, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The interior of the house was like stepping back in time. Antique furniture, oil lamps, and faded photographs adorned every surface. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and something else I couldn't quite place. Something older, mustier. "Let me show you to your room," Margaret said, already halfway up the stairs. I'm sure you must be tired after your long journey. I followed her up to the second floor, my hand trailing along the smooth wooden banister. She led me to a room at the end of the hall, pushing open the door with a flourish. "Here we are," she said. "I hope you'll be comfortable." The room was small but cozy, dominated by a large four-poster bed. A vase of dried flowers sat on the nightstand and heavy curtains framed the window. It was charming, in an old-fashioned sort of way. "Thank you," I said, setting my overnight bag on the bed. "This is lovely." Margaret beamed at me. "Wonderful. Now, why don't you get some rest? Breakfast is at 8 sharp. Don't be late. Mr. Rosewood doesn't like to be kept waiting." Before I could ask who Mr. Rosewood was, she had slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall, then silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling uneasy. There was something about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I was too tired to dwell on it. I kicked off my shoes and crawled under the covers, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of bacon wafting up from downstairs. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The long drive, the bed and breakfast, Margaret. I got dressed quickly and made my way downstairs, following the scent of breakfast. I found myself in a large dining room, a long table set for at least a dozen people. But there was only one other person there, a man sitting at the head of the table, hidden behind a newspaper. "Good morning," I said hesitantly. The newspaper lowered, revealing a man who looked to be in his 70s, with sharp blue eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard. "Ah, our guest arrives," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Please, sit. Margaret will bring your breakfast shortly." I took a seat, feeling oddly like a child called to the principal's office. "You must be Mr. Rosewood," I said, trying to break the tension. He nodded, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. "Indeed, and you are." I told him my name, then added, "I hope it's all right that I stopped here without a reservation. I was just so tired, and when I saw the sign..." Mr. Rosewood waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Rosewood is always open to those who need it. In fact, we insist you stay a while. Get some proper rest." Before I could respond, Margaret appeared, carrying a tray laden with food. She set a plate in front of me. Eggs, bacon, toast, all perfectly prepared. "Eat up," she said, that same unwavering smile on her face. "You'll need your strength." I ate in silence, acutely aware of Mr. Rosewood's eyes on me. When I finished, Margaret whisked away my plate before I could even thank her. "Now then," Mr. Rosewood said, leaning forward, "why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? What brings you to our neck of the woods?" I explained about my job, my destination, my impromptu decision to stop for the night. As I talked, I noticed Margaret hovering at the edge of the room, listening intently. There was something in her eyes, a hunger that hadn't been there the night before. "Fascinating," Mr. Rosewood said when I finished. "You know, we don't get many visitors here at Rosewood. It's a shame, really. We have so much to offer." I glanced at my watch, suddenly eager to be on my way. "Well, I really should be going. Thank you for your hospitality, but I have a long drive ahead of me." Mr. Rosewood's smile faded slightly. "Leaving so soon? But you've only just arrived. Surely you can stay another night." I stood up, shaking my head. "I'm sorry, but I really can't. I need to get going." I turned to leave, but Margaret was suddenly there, blocking my path. Now, she said, her voice no longer warm and inviting. "Mr. Rosewood asked you to stay. It would be rude to refuse." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I appreciate the offer, but I really must be going." "Please, excuse me." I tried to step around her, but her hand shot out. gripping my arm with surprising strength. "I'm afraid we can't let you do that," she said, her eyes now cold and hard. "You see, we need you here." I yanked my arm free and backed away, my heart pounding. Mr. Rosewood was on his feet now, advancing towards me with a predatory grace that belied his age. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" Mr. Rosewood's smile was terrible to behold. "Want? My dear, we want you to stay. Forever. You see, Rosewood needs fresh blood to survive. And you, my friend, are exactly what we've been waiting for." I turned to run, but the dining room door slammed shut of its own accord. I was trapped. Margaret's laughter echoed through the room, high and cruel. "Did you really think you could just leave? Oh, you poor foolish thing. No one ever leaves Rosewood." I looked around frantically, searching for a way out. The windows were barred, the doors locked, and Mr. Rosewood and Margaret were closing in, their faces twisted into inhuman masks of hunger and glee. "Please," I begged, backing into a corner. "Just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this place, I swear." Mr. Rosewood shook his head, almost sadly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, you're part of Rosewood now, and Rosewood never lets go of what belongs to it." As they reached for me, their fingers elongating into claws, I realized the truth. Rosewood wasn't just a bed and breakfast. It was something ancient, something hungry, and I had willingly walked right into its trap. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Margaret's eyes, no longer human, but glowing with an otherworldly light. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I would never leave this place. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days, weeks. Time has no meaning in Rosewood. I exist in a fog, aware but unable to act. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other guests, lost souls like me, trapped in this nightmare. And always, there's Mr. Rosewood and Margaret, their ageless faces watching, waiting. For what, I don't know, but I fear I'll find out soon enough. If you're reading this, heed my warning. If you're ever driving late at night and see a sign for Rosewood bed breakfast, keep driving. Don't stop, don't look back. Because once you check into Rosewood, you can never check out. And somewhere in this endless night, I'll be waiting. Another lost soul in Rosewood's collection. Another reason for weary travelers to keep driving, no matter how tired they might be. Because some beds are better left unslept in, and some breakfasts are far too costly to be worth the price. The moment his eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional gas station or lonely diner. The sun had long since set, and the dark ribbon of road stretched endlessly before me, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional passing truck. I was tired, my eyes heavy with fatigue, when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. In the split second I had to make a decision. All the warnings I'd ever heard about picking up hitchhikers flashed through my mind. But it was cold out, and something in the slump of his shoulders made me think of my younger brother. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was pulling over. He approached the car slowly, his face hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap. As he opened the passenger door, the dome light flickered on, and I got my first good look at him. He was younger than I'd thought, maybe in his early 20s, with a scruffy beard and clothes that had seen better days. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "I've been out here for hours." I nodded, trying to quell the unease in my stomach. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he replied vaguely, settling into the seat. "I'll let you know when to drop me off." I pulled back onto the highway, the silence in the car broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional static from the radio. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't help stealing glances at my passenger. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "So," I said, desperate to break the tension, "what brings you out here in the middle of the night?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "Running from something, or someone. Does it matter?" I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I guess not." We lapsed back into silence, the miles ticking by. I was just starting to relax when I saw his hand move out of the corner of my eye. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw the glint of metal. "Pull over," he said, his voice no longer soft. It was hard, cold, with an edge that made my blood run cold. I didn't have to look to know he was holding a knife. I could feel the threat of it, hovering just at the edge of my vision. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't have to do this. I can just let you out here, no questions asked." He laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "It's too late for that. Pull over. Now." My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this. We were in the middle of nowhere, no other cars in sight. If I refused to pull over, what would he do? The knife glinted again, answering my unspoken question. Slowly, my hands shaking, I guided the car onto the shoulder. As soon as we came to a stop, he was in motion, grabbing my keys and phone. "Get out," he ordered, gesturing with the knife. I complied, the cold night air hitting me like a slap as I stepped out of the car. He followed, keeping the knife trained on me. "Walk," he said, pointing towards a dirt road I hadn't noticed before. It disappeared into a thick copse of trees, the darkness between them absolute. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "You don't have to do this. Just take the car and go." His eyes, when they met mine, were empty. "Dead." I said walk. I turned towards the dirt road, my legs feeling like lead. Each step took me further from the highway, further from any chance of rescue. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our feet and my own ragged breathing. I tried to keep track of how far we'd gone, but fear had muddled my senses. It could have been minutes or hours. Finally, we came to a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and empty. "Inside," he said, prodding me with the knife. The cabin was a single room, bare except for a rickety chair and a table covered in what looked like old bloodstains. My stomach churned at the sight. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the chair. As I sat, he pulled a length of rope from his pocket and began tying me to the chair. His movements were practiced, efficient. This clearly wasn't his first time. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused in his work, looking at me with those dead eyes. "Because I can," he said simply. "Because the world is chaos, and I'm just playing my part." With me secured, he moved to the table, laying out an array of tools that made my blood run cold. Knives, pliers, things I couldn't even identify. I closed my eyes, unable to look anymore. "Open your eyes," he said. When I didn't comply, I felt the cold press of metal against my cheek. I said, "Open them." I forced my eyes open, meeting his gaze. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker there, a hint of doubt, maybe even remorse, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that terrible emptiness. "Please," I tried one last time. "I have a family, people who will miss me." He picked up a knife, turning it over in his hands. "Everyone has a family," he said. "Everyone is missed by someone. That's what makes this interesting." As he approached me, knife in hand, time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with painful clarity. The way the blade caught the moonlight streaming through the dirty window. The flecks of dried blood under his fingernails. The slight tremor in his hand as he raised the knife. In that moment, something snapped inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me turned into desperate, animalistic rage. With strength I didn't know I possessed, I threw myself backwards, the chair splintering as it hit the floor. He stumbled back, surprised by my sudden movement. I rolled, ignoring the pain as splinters dug into my skin, and managed to free one hand from the loosened ropes. He recovered quickly, lunging at me with the knife. I caught his wrist, the blade inches from my face. We struggled, our breaths coming in harsh pants. I could feel my strength failing, the knife inching closer. In desperation, I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the stomach. He doubled over, the knife clattering to the floor. I scrambled for it, my fingers closing around the handle just as he grabbed my ankle. What happened next was a blur. I remember swinging the knife wildly, feeling it connect. I remember his grip loosening, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, and then silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my ears. When I finally found the courage to move, to look, I saw him lying motionless beside me, a dark stain spreading across his chest. My hands shook as I finished freeing myself from the ropes. I stood on unsteady legs, looking down at the man who had nearly ended my life. In death, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. I felt a surge of pity, quickly replaced by revulsion, at him, at what he'd tried to do, at what I'd been forced to do. I searched the cabin, finding my phone and keys and his discarded jacket. As I stepped outside, the cool night air felt like a blessing on my skin. I wanted to run, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible, but I knew I couldn't. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. As I waited for the police to arrive, I sat on the cabin's porch, watching the first hints of dawn color the sky. I thought about how close I'd come to never seeing another sunrise, about the fine line between victim and survivor, between life and death. When the police finally arrived, lights flashing and sirens wailing, it felt like waking from a nightmare. But as I looked down at my blood-stained hands, I knew the real nightmare was just beginning. Because even though I'd survived, a part of me had died in that cabin. The part that believed in the basic goodness of people, that trusted strangers, that thought the worst could never happen to me. As I was led to a police car, shock blanket draped over my shoulders, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The person staring back at me was a stranger, older, harder, with eyes that had seen too much. I knew then that the hitchhiker had taken something from me after all. Not my life, but my innocence. And I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. The road stretched out before the police car, no longer a path to adventure, but a reminder of how quickly life can change, of how a simple act of kindness can turn into a fight for survival, and of how, sometimes, the real monster isn't the stranger you pick up on the side of the road, but the one you become when pushed to the very edge of existence. The moment I saw him in the background of our family photo, I knew our perfect vacation had become a nightmare. But by then, it was already too late. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. 2 weeks in a picturesque coastal town. Just me, my wife Sarah, and our 2 kids, Tommy and Lily. We'd saved for months, poring over brochures and travel websites, planning every detail. The quaint little beach house we'd rented looked like something out of a postcard, with its weathered blue shutters and wraparound porch. The first few days were idyllic. We built sand castles, splashed in the waves, and explored the charming town center with its ice cream parlors and souvenir shops. Sarah and I even managed to sneak away for a romantic dinner one evening, leaving the kids with a local babysitter recommended by our rental agency. It was on the 4th day that I first noticed something odd. We were having lunch at a beachside cafe and I had this sudden, inexplicable feeling of being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just other tourists enjoying the sunshine and sea breeze. "Everything okay, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just thought I saw someone I knew. Must have been mistaken." But the feeling persisted throughout the day, at the beach, at the local museum, even as we walked back to our rental house. Always that prickle at the back of my neck, that sense of unseen eyes following our every move. That night, as I was uploading photos from my camera to my laptop, I saw him for the first time. It was a picture of the kids building a sandcastle. In the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a man. He was facing away from the camera, but something about his posture, the way he seemed to be angled towards us, made my stomach clench. I quickly flicked through the other photos from that day. There he was again. And again. Sometimes just a blur at the edge of the frame. Sometimes clearly visible, but always with his face obscured. Always watching. "Sarah," I called, my voice shakier than I intended. "Can you come here a second?" She came over, peering at the screen over my shoulder. "What's up?" I pointed out the figure in the photos, that nagging sense of unease blossoming into full-blown anxiety. "Do you see him? He's in all of these." Sarah squinted at the screen, then shrugged. "It's probably just a coincidence, hon. Lots of people at the beach, bound to get some in the background of our photos." I wanted to believe her, wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, an overactive imagination fueled by too many crime documentaries. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The next day, I found myself constantly scanning our surroundings, looking for that familiar silhouette. And there he was, across the street as we left our rental house, browsing a shelf of seashells 2 aisles over in a gift shop, sitting at a table across the restaurant during dinner. I pointed him out to Sarah, trying to keep my voice low so as not to alarm the kids. There, by the window. Blue shirt, baseball cap, that's him. Sarah looked, her brow furrowing. "Are you sure I don't recognize him?" "I'm telling you, it's the same guy. He's following us." She placed a hand on my arm, her voice gentle but with an undercurrent of concern. "Honey, I think maybe you're getting a little paranoid. Why would anyone be following us?" I wanted to explain, to make her understand the certainty I felt, but looking at her worried face, at Tommy and Lily happily coloring their kids' menus, I faltered. Was I overreacting, seeing patterns where none existed? I tried to push it from my mind, to focus on enjoying our vacation. But with each passing day, the sightings became more frequent, more brazen. He no longer tried to hide, standing openly on street corners, watching us from cafe patios. And then came the notes. The first one we found slipped under the door of our rental house. A simple white card with 4 words written in block letters. "I'm watching you always." Sarah's face paled as she read it. Maybe it's just a prank. Kids from around here messing with the tourists. But we both knew it wasn't. This was real, and it was happening to us. We went to the local police, but they were frustratingly unhelpful. Without any clear threat or evidence of a crime, there was little they could do. They advised us to remain vigilant and report any further incidents. We tried to carry on, to salvage what we could of our vacation. But the carefree joy of those first few days was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing fear. We stayed together at all times, hurrying from place to place, always looking over our shoulders. The kids picked up on our anxiety, becoming clingy and irritable. "Why can't we go to the beach?" Tommy whined one afternoon. "You promised we could go every day." I knelt down, forcing a smile. "I know, buddy, but the weather's not great for the beach today. How about we play some board games instead?" He stomped off, clearly unsatisfied with my weak excuse. I felt a pang of guilt. This was supposed to be a happy time, full of memories we'd cherish for years to come. Instead, it had become a waking nightmare. The final straw came 3 days before we were set to leave. We'd decided to have one last family outing, a picnic in the park near our rental house. As I was setting up the blanket, Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and frightened. That man is taking pictures of us." I whirled around, my heart in my throat, and there he was, not 20 feet away, a camera with a long lens pointed directly at us. When he saw me looking, he lowered the camera and smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that sent chills down my spine. I was on my feet in an instant, racing towards him. But he was quicker, melting into the crowd before I could reach him. I stood there, panting and frustrated, as Sarah came up behind me. "We need to leave," I said, my decision made. "Now, today. I don't care about the money we'll lose on the rental. It's not safe here." Sarah nodded, her face grim. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Okay, let's go." We packed in a frenzy, throwing clothes haphazardly into suitcases, leaving behind books and toys in our haste to get out. The kids were confused and upset, but we had no time to explain. As we were loading up the car, I saw a flutter of white on the windshield. Another note. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. "You can't escape me. I'll find you wherever you go." I crumpled the paper, shoving it deep into my pocket. Everyone in the car. Now, we drove through the night, stopping only for gas and quick bathroom breaks. I kept expecting to see headlights following us, to hear the click of a camera shutter in the darkness. But there was nothing. It wasn't until we were home, our own front door safely locked behind us, that we began to relax. Sarah put the kids to bed while I double-checked all the windows and doors. "Do you think it's over?" Sarah asked as we collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with us. I wanted to reassure her, to say yes, we were safe now. But the memory of that cold smile, of those endless photos with the watching figure, was still too fresh. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we'll be more careful from now on. No more posting our plans on social media. No more geotagging our photos. We'll be okay." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. We sat there in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. A week passed. Then two. Slowly, life began to return to normal. We explained away our abrupt return to the kids as a family emergency, promising to make it up to them with day trips and special treats. I was just starting to believe it was all behind us when the envelope arrived. No return address, just our names in that now familiar block lettering. Inside was a single photograph. Our family, smiling on the beach. And there in the background, clearer than ever before, was the man. For the first time, I could see his face. He was smiling directly at the camera, directly at us. On the back of the photo, 2 words, "See you soon." I stared at those words, my blood running cold, because I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that this wasn't over. Our perfect vacation had become a nightmare, and that nightmare had followed us home. Now, every knock at the door makes us jump. Every unfamiliar car on our street sets my heart racing. We've become prisoners in our own home, always watching, always afraid. Because somewhere out there, he's watching too, waiting, planning his next move. And all we can do is wait with him, wondering when, not if, he'll strike again. The moment we heard the footsteps echoing through the abandoned halls, we knew our urban exploration had taken a terrifying turn. But by then, it was already too late to turn back. It had started as just another adventure for our little group of urban explorers. There were 4 of us. Me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Mia, and our newest member, a guy named Chris who joined our online forum a few weeks back. We'd been eyeing this old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to check it out. The place had been shut down for years, its windows boarded up and its once pristine walls now covered in graffiti. Local legends spoke of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and people going missing after venturing inside. We didn't believe in any of that nonsense, of course. To us, it was just another cool location to explore and document. We arrived just after sunset, the fading light casting long shadows across the overgrown parking lot. The air was thick with the scent of decay and stagnant water. As we approached the main entrance, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I brushed it off as excitement. But looking back, I wonder if it was a warning I should have heeded. "Remember," Jake said as we prepared our gear, "we stick together. No wandering off alone, no matter what we find in there." We all nodded in agreement. It was our cardinal rule, one we'd never broken before. How could we have known that this night would test that rule to its breaking point? Getting inside was easier than we'd anticipated. A back door had been forced open long ago, its lock rusted and useless. As we slipped inside, the smell hit us like a wall: mold, dust, and something else. Something sickly sweet that made my stomach churn. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and abandoned medical equipment. It was like stepping into a post-apocalyptic movie set. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors, our cameras clicking as we documented everything we saw. "Hey, check this out," Chris called, shining his light on a faded sign. "Psychiatric ward, this way." A collective shiver ran through the group. The psychiatric ward, that's where all the best stories came from, where the most traumatized patients were kept, where the most questionable treatments were performed. "Should we?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake grinned, his face ghostly in the beam of his flashlight. "That's what we came for, isn't it?" As we made our way deeper into the hospital, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. More than once, I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing when I turned to look. The psychiatric ward was a maze of narrow corridors and small cell-like rooms. Many of the doors were still locked, their small windows revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The walls were covered in scratch marks and faded writing. Pleas for help, angry outbursts, desperate prayers. "Jesus," Jake muttered, running his hand along one particularly deep set of scratches. "What the hell happened here?" That's when we heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A soft thud, like a door closing, somewhere deeper in the ward. We all froze, our eyes meeting in the dim light of our flashlights. It could have been anything. The building settling, a rat knocking something over. But deep down, we all knew it wasn't. "Maybe we should go," Mia suggested, her voice trembling slightly. But curiosity overrode caution. We'd come too far to turn back now. Slowly, cautiously, we moved towards the source of the sound. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking us further from safety and deeper into the unknown. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. And then we saw it, a door, slightly ajar, where all the others had been closed. As we watched, it slowly swung open, revealing a room beyond. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Is someone there?" No response. Just that terrible, expectant silence. We should have left then, should have turned and run, gotten out while we still could. But we didn't. Instead, we stepped into that room, our flashlights sweeping across peeling wallpaper and a rusted bed frame. That's when the door slammed shut behind us. Panic set in immediately. Jake and Chris threw themselves at the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something on the other side was holding it closed. "This isn't funny," Mia shouted, her voice high with fear. "Let us out." But there was no response. Just the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving away down the corridor. We were trapped. The next few hours were a blur of fear and desperate attempts to escape. We tried prying the door open, breaking the hinges, even smashing through the walls. Nothing worked. It was as if the room itself was determined to keep us there. As our flashlight batteries began to die, casting us into deeper and deeper darkness, the true horror of our situation began to sink in. We were locked in an abandoned psychiatric ward, with no way to call for help and no idea if anyone even knew we were here. And all the while, we could hear them. Footsteps in the hallway, whispers just on the edge of hearing, the occasional scrape of something being dragged across the floor. We weren't alone in this place, and whatever was out there, it didn't want us to leave. As the last of our flashlights flickered out, plunging us into total darkness, I felt a hand grab my arm. I nearly screamed before I recognized Jake's voice. "Listen," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "We need to split up. Find a way out." "Are you insane?" I hissed back. "That's exactly what they want us to do." But Jake was insistent. "It's our only chance. Chris and I will try to force the door again. You and Mia see if you can find another way out. A vent, a weak spot in the wall, anything." I wanted to argue, to remind him of our cardinal rule: never split up. But as another set of footsteps echoed outside our room, I realized he was right. We were running out of options. Slowly, carefully, Mia and I felt our way along the walls, searching for anything that might lead to freedom. The darkness was absolute. Every sound amplified in the stillness. I could hear Mia's ragged breathing, could feel the trembling of her hand in mine. That's when I felt it, a slight draft, coming from somewhere near the floor. A vent, just large enough for us to crawl through. "Jake," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I think we found something." But there was no response. No sound of movement from where Jake and Chris had been trying to force the door. "Jake," Mia called, panic edging into her voice. "Chris, where are you guys?" Silence. They were gone. The realization hit us like a physical blow. They'd left us, or something had taken them. Either way, we were alone. With shaking hands, we pried the vent cover off and peered into the darkness beyond. The smell that wafted out was putrid, like rotting meat and stagnant water. But we had no choice. It was our only way out. I went first, crawling on my belly through the narrow space. The metal was cold against my skin, and more than once I felt something skitter across my hand in the darkness. I tried not to think about what it might be. We crawled for what felt like hours, the vent twisting and turning, sometimes sloping downward so steeply I was afraid we'd fall. And all the while, I could hear something moving in the vents behind us, following us. Finally, mercifully, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. With a final burst of energy, I pushed forward, tumbling out of the vent and onto cold, damp grass. Mia followed a moment later, gasping for air. We were outside. We'd made it. But as I looked up at the looming bulk of the hospital, I realized our nightmare was far from over. Because there, staring down at us from a third-floor window, were Jake and Chris. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and unseeing, and standing behind them, barely visible in the gloom, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, with long, spindly fingers resting on Jake and Chris's shoulders. As we watched, frozen in horror, the figure raised one hand in a mocking wave. Then the curtain fell, and they were gone. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. Ran until we reached the safety of streetlights and passing cars. But even now, months later, I still wake up in a cold sweat. The memory of that figure burned into my mind. We never saw Jake and Chris again. The police searched the hospital, but found no trace of them. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. Sometimes late at night, I think I can hear whispers coming from the vents in my apartment. Familiar voices, calling my name, begging for help. But I know better now. I know that some places are better left unexplored, some doors better left unopened. Because sometimes, when you go looking for adventure in abandoned places, you find something else entirely. Something that's been waiting for you. Something that never wanted you to leave. The first time I heard the noise, I dismissed it as the building settling. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was already too late. I'd been working as a night security guard at Crimson Tower for about 6 months. It was a cushy job, perfect for a college student like me trying to make ends meet. The pay was decent. The hours let me attend classes during the day, and most nights were so quiet I could get my studying done between rounds. Crimson Tower was one of those sleek modern office buildings that dominated the city skyline. 60 floors of glass and steel, home to law firms, tech startups, and a handful of companies I'd never heard of. During the day, it bustled with activity, but at night, it transformed into an eerily quiet fortress of empty cubicles and darkened conference rooms. My shift always started the same way. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., relieve the evening guard, and settle into the security office on the ground floor. From there, I had access to the building's camera feeds and could monitor all entry points. Every 2 hours, I'd do a round, checking each floor to make sure everything was secure. It was during one of these rounds, about a month into my job, that I first heard it. I was on the 42nd floor, making my way down the main corridor, when a sound stopped me in my tracks. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning, but unmistakable. Footsteps coming from one of the offices ahead. My heart rate picked up as I unclipped the flashlight from my belt. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silent hallway. "This is security. Is someone there?" No response. Just that eerie silence. I approached the office where I thought the sound had come from, my palms sweaty on the flashlight. The door was closed, the nameplate reading Dr. Evelyn Marsh, Research Director. I took a deep breath and turned the handle. The office was empty, no sign of disturbance, no open windows, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. I did a thorough check, looking under the desk and in the closet, but found nothing. Must have been my imagination, I told myself, or maybe the wind somehow. I finished my round and headed back to the security office, pushing the incident from my mind. But a week later, it happened again. This time, I was on the 55th floor when I heard it. Not footsteps this time, but a voice, a whisper, so quiet I could barely make it out. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The words indistinct, but the tone urgent, almost pleading. I spent nearly an hour searching that floor, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating empty offices and silent corridors. Again, I found nothing, but as I rode the elevator back down to the ground floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I debated mentioning it to my supervisor, but what would I say? That I was hearing things, that the empty building was spooking me. I'd be laughed out of the job. So I kept quiet, hoping it was just stress or a lack of sleep playing tricks on my mind. For the next few weeks, everything was normal. The nights passed uneventfully, and I started to relax. Maybe I had just been imagining things after all. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, just past 2 a.m. I was in the security office, half-heartedly flipping through my textbook, when movement on one of the monitors caught my eye. It was a feed from the 60th floor, the executive level that was usually off-limits even during the day. A figure was moving across the frame, too quickly for me to make out clearly. It disappeared from view, then reappeared on another camera, heading towards the stairs. I sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. This wasn't my imagination. There was someone in the building. I radioed for backup, then grabbed my flashlight and headed for the elevators. Protocol said I should wait for help to arrive, but something told me I didn't have time. Whoever this was, they knew the cameras were there. They were moving with purpose. The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt like it took an eternity. When the doors finally slid open, I was met with a gust of cold air that made me shiver despite my uniform. The executive level was laid out differently from the rest of the building, with plush carpeting and wood-paneled walls instead of the usual cubicles and fluorescent lighting. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Security, show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A laugh, high and cruel, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. I ran towards the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded a corner, I saw a door at the end of the hall standing open, light spilling out into the corridor. I approached cautiously, flashlight raised. "This is your last warning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come out with your hands up." No response. Just that terrible silence again. I reached the doorway and peered inside. It was a large office, probably belonging to the CEO or someone equally important. Papers were strewn across the floor, and the window behind the desk was shattered, cold night air whistling through the broken glass. But what caught my eye was the computer on the desk. It was on, the screen glowing in the darkness. As I watched, words began to appear, as if someone was typing. "You shouldn't have come up here." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. There was no one in the room, no one at the keyboard. More words appeared. "But since you're here, let me show you the truth." Suddenly, every screen in the office flickered to life. Images flashed across them, too quick for me to process at first. But as I watched, horrified, I began to understand what I was seeing. Experiments. Terrible. Inhuman experiments being conducted in hidden labs deep within the building. People strapped to tables, screaming silently as machines pumped glowing fluids into their veins. Grotesque creatures, half human and half something else, locked in cages barely big enough to hold them. And overseeing it all, a figure I recognized from the company's promotional materials. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, the research director whose office I had searched weeks ago. The images stopped as suddenly as they had begun, replaced by a single sentence. "Now you know. What will you do?" I backed out of the office, my mind spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, or a hallucination, or... A hand fell on my shoulder, heavy and cold. I whirled around, coming face to face with Dr. Marsh herself. But her eyes were wrong. Pitch black, with no whites visible at all. "I'm afraid we can't let you leave," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the empty hallway. "You've seen too much." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember is Dr. Marsh's face, twisted into an inhuman grin as darkness closed in around me. I woke up in the security office, slumped over my desk. The clock showed 6 a.m., the end of my shift. On the monitors, I could see the early morning cleaning crew arriving, the first employees trickling in for the day. Had it all been a dream? A vivid nightmare brought on by too many late nights and too much caffeine? I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted to believe it. But as I stood up, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping in an awkward position, something fell from my pocket. A small glass vial filled with a glowing blue liquid, and pinned to my uniform, a note in elegant handwriting. "Welcome to the team. Your real work begins tonight." I should have quit then. Should have run and never looked back. But curiosity, that damn curiosity that had got me into this mess in the first place, wouldn't let me. So I'll be back tonight. Back to Crimson Tower, with its impossible experiments and its dark secrets. Because now I know the truth. And I have to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, no matter where it leads. Even if it leads somewhere I can never come back from. The moment we saw the eyes glowing in the darkness, we knew our camping trip had taken a terrifying turn. But by then, it was already too late to escape. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just 4 friends enjoying the great outdoors. Jake, Kean, my best friend since childhood, had suggested the trip. His girlfriend Mia and my girlfriend Sarah were eager for an adventure. And I was just happy to get away from the stress of work for a few days. We'd chosen a remote spot deep in the national forest, far from the usual campgrounds and hiking trails. Jake had found it online, on some obscure camping forum. "It'll be perfect," he'd said, his eyes shining with excitement. No crowds, no noise, just us and nature. The drive took longer than expected, the paved road giving way to gravel, then to a rough dirt track that had Sarah gripping the dashboard and Mia asking if we were sure this was the right way. But Jake was confident, and I trusted his sense of direction. We arrived just as the sun was setting. the forest around us already dark under the thick canopy of trees. The clearing Jake had promised was there, a small open space barely big enough for our 2 tents and a campfire. As we set up camp, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to watch our every move. Guys, Sarah said, her voice hushed as she looked around. Does anyone else feel like we're being watched? Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. It's just the trees, babe. They're not used to having visitors out here. We tried to shake off the weird vibe, focusing on getting our tents up and starting a fire. As the flames flickered to life, casting dancing shadows across the clearing, we began to relax. We roasted marshmallows, told ghost stories, and sipped beers we packed in. For a while, it felt like the camping trip we'd imagined. But as the night wore on, that feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. More than once, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing but darkness beyond the firelight. Did you guys see that? Mia asked suddenly, her voice tight with fear. We all turned to look where she was pointing. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a flash of movement. And eyes, dozens of eyes, glowing in the darkness just beyond the edge of our camp. Holy shit, Jake breathed, scrambling to his feet. What the hell are those? Probably just animals, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as my heart raced. Raccoons, maybe, or deer. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. These eyes were too high off the ground for any normal forest creature, and they were watching us with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. We should go, Sarah said, already backing towards the tents. Pack up and get out of here. No one argued. We quickly doused the fire and started grabbing our things, all pretense of calm abandoned. The eyes continued to watch, more appearing every time I looked up. That's when we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. Run, Jake yelled, grabbing Mia's hand and bolting for the car. We didn't need to be told twice. Abandoning our half-packed gear, we ran. The forest that had been so silent before was now alive with noise. Branches snapped behind us, and that terrible growl grew louder, joined by others. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. Shapes were moving in the darkness, tall and lean, loping after us with inhuman speed. I couldn't make out details in the gloom, but what I saw was enough to make me run faster than I ever had in my life. We burst out of the trees onto the dirt road where we parked the car. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them into the ignition. Hurry! Mia screamed, her eyes fixed on the tree line. The engine roared to life just as the first of our pursuers emerged from the forest. In the headlights, I caught a glimpse of pale, elongated limbs, a face that was almost but not quite human, and those glowing eyes. Then Jake floored it, and we were speeding down the dirt road, the car bouncing and shuddering over the rough terrain. For a few minutes, we drove in terrified silence, all of us straining to hear if we were still being followed. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the pounding of our hearts and our ragged breathing. What were those things? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one had an answer. We drove through the night, not stopping until we hit the highway. Even then, we didn't feel safe until we were back in the city, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights and the sounds of civilization. We went to the police, of course, told them about the creatures in the woods, the chase, the abandoned campsite. They listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. A group of young people, out in the woods, probably drinking. It was clear they thought we'd imagined it all, or exaggerated some encounter with normal wildlife. We'll send a patrol out to check the area, the officer said, but his tone made it clear it was a low priority. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. We scoured the internet for similar stories, for any explanation of what we might have encountered. We found nothing concrete, just vague legends and campfire tales about creatures in the woods that were never quite human. Jake was the first to start doubting himself. Maybe we did imagine it, he said one night, about a week after the incident. I mean, it was dark. We were all keyed up from the ghost stories. But I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, of the inhuman speed with which those things had chased us. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear that growl echoing in the distance. We never went camping again after that night. The four of us drifted apart, each dealing with the trauma in our own way. Sarah threw herself into work. Mia became obsessed with researching cryptozoology. And Jake just tried to forget. But I can't forget. I find myself drawn back to that forest, driving out to where the paved road ends, staring into the darkness beyond. I never get out of the car, never venture back into those trees, but I watch. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see eyes watching back. I don't know what's out there in those woods. I don't know if they're still there, waiting for unwary campers to stumble into their territory. But I do know one thing. There are places in this world where humans don't belong. Places where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. And if you find yourself in one of those places, don't try to understand it. Don't try to face it. Just run, and pray that you're faster than whatever's chasing you. Because in the deep, dark woods, where the trees watch and the silence holds secrets, there are things that have never known the touch of sunlight or the sound of human voices. Things that hunger for more than just flesh and blood. They hunger for souls. And once they set their sights on you, they never, ever give up the chase. So the next time you're planning a camping trip, stick to the well-traveled paths. Stay where the firelight reaches and the sounds of civilization can still be heard. Because out there in the darkness, in the places untouched by man, there are horrors waiting to be discovered. And once discovered, they can never be forgotten or outrun. The moment I realized the vase had moved, I knew I wasn't alone in the house. But by then, it was already too late. It was supposed to be an easy gig. My college roommate, Alex, had asked me to house sit for his parents while they were on a month-long European cruise. The house was a beautiful Victorian in a quiet suburb, and all I had to do was water the plants, feed the cat, and make sure nothing burned down. Plus, I'd have the whole place to myself. A welcome change from my cramped studio apartment. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time working on my thesis, enjoying the spacious kitchen, and trying not to feel too envious of the life Alex had grown up in. The cat, a fat orange tabby named Mr. Whiskers, mostly ignored me except at mealtimes. It was on the fourth night that I first noticed something odd. I'd been up late, poring over research papers in the study, when I decided to call it a night. As I was heading upstairs to the guest room, I passed by the living room and something caught my eye. The antique vase that usually sat on the mantelpiece was now on the coffee table. I paused, frowning. Had I moved it earlier and forgotten? I didn't think so, but I'd been pretty absorbed in my work. Shrugging it off, I put the vase back in its place and went to bed. The next morning, the vase was back on the coffee table. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at it. There was no way I'd moved it again. Mr. Whiskers was too fat and lazy to jump up on the mantel, and even if he had, how would he have carried the vase to the table without breaking it? I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every creak of the old house settling. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the house was haunted, I joked to myself, trying to lighten the mood. But the joke fell flat in the empty rooms. That night, I made sure to double-check all the locks before going to bed. I lay awake for hours, straining to hear any unusual sounds. Just as I was finally drifting off, a loud thud from downstairs jolted me awake, my heart pounding. I sat up in bed. The house was silent again. but I knew I hadn't imagined the noise. Slowly, I got up and crept to the door, grabbing a tennis racket from my bag as a makeshift weapon. The hallway was dark and empty as I made my way downstairs. I flicked on lights as I went, not wanting to be surprised by whatever or whoever had made that sound. When I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The vase lay shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered across the hardwood. And there, on the wall above the mantel, written in what looked horribly like blood, were the words, "Get out." I ran. I didn't bother packing, didn't stop to think. I just grabbed my keys and my phone and bolted for the door. It wasn't until I was in my car, tires screeching as I peeled out of the driveway, that I realized I'd left Mr. Whiskers behind. Guilt warred with fear as I drove aimlessly through the quiet suburban streets. I couldn't just abandon the cat, could I? But the thought of going back into that house made my skin crawl. In the end, duty won out over fear. I took a deep breath, steeled my nerves, and turned the car around. The house loomed before me, dark and silent. With shaking hands, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Mr. Whiskers," I called softly, not wanting to alert anyone or anything else to my presence. "Here, kitty kitty." A meow from upstairs made me jump. Cursing under my breath, I started up the stairs, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. I found Mr. Whiskers in the guest room, curled up on the bed as if nothing was wrong. "Come on, you," I muttered, scooping him up. He meowed in protest but didn't struggle. As I turned to leave, something on the dresser caught my eye. It was a photograph I hadn't noticed before, showing a family standing in front of the house. But it wasn't Alex's family. The people in the photo were strangers, their faces somber as they stared at the camera. With a growing sense of unease, I looked closer at the photo. The house in the background looked older, more run down than it did now. And the clothes the family wore seemed outdated, like something from the 1950s. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my heart in my throat. The doorway was empty, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the hallway beyond. "Hello," I called out, hating how my voice shook. "Is someone there?" No response, just the oppressive silence of the house. Clutching Mr. Whiskers to my chest, I edged towards the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Stay." I ran. Down the stairs, through the living room with its shattered vase and bloody warning, out the front door and into my car. Mr. Whiskers yowled in protest as I shoved him into the passenger seat, but I ignored him, fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life and I sped away, not daring to look back. It wasn't until I was miles away, pulled over in a 24-hour diner parking lot, that I allowed myself to breathe. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and called Alex. "Dude, what the hell?" he answered, his voice groggy with sleep. "It's 3 a.m. "Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to be honest with me. Is there something you're not telling me about your parents' house?" There was a long pause. Then, "What do you mean?" I told him everything. The moving vase, the noise in the night, the shattered pieces on the floor, the writing on the wall, the strange photograph. As I spoke, I could hear Alex's breathing getting heavier. "Shit," he said when I finished. "Shit, shit, shit. I never thought. I mean, it's been years since." "Since what, Alex?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on?" He sighed heavily. "Look, it's a long story, but you're right. There is something about that house. Something my parents never told anyone outside the family." Over the next hour, Alex told me a story that made my blood run cold. The house, it turned out, had a dark history. Back in the 1950s, it had belonged to a family called the Millers. One night, for reasons never fully explained, the father had murdered his wife and children before taking his own life. The house had stood empty for years after that, gaining a reputation as being haunted. Alex's parents had bought it cheap in the 80s, drawn by its Victorian charm and skeptical of ghost stories. But it hadn't taken long for strange things to start happening. Objects moving on their own, unexplained noises in the night, glimpses of figures that vanished when looked at directly, and always, a sense of being watched. "Why the hell didn't you warn me?" I asked, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "And I'm sorry," Alex said, and I could hear the genuine remorse in his voice. "It's been so long since anything really bad happened. We hoped it was over." I looked over at Mr. Whiskers, who was now sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, oblivious to the terror of the night. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Just stay away from the house," Alex said. "I'll call my parents, explain everything. We'll figure something out." I hung up, feeling drained. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me exhausted and shaken. But I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not after what I'd experienced. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the sky, I started my car and headed for home. I didn't know what would happen with the house, or how Alex and his family would deal with their supernatural tenants. All I knew was that I was done with house sitting. Forever. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that house. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see a figure sitting in the back seat, its dead eyes meeting mine. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear that whisper. "Stay," it says, its voice a cold wind from a place beyond death. "Stay with us." I never will, of course. But part of me wonders if I ever truly left that house behind, or if, in some way, it's still with me, waiting for the day I let my guard down and answer its call. The moment I saw the host's smile falter, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. But by then it was already too late to leave. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway for me and my girlfriend, Sarah. We'd been dating for a year and wanted to celebrate with a weekend trip somewhere special. When I stumbled across the listing for a charming cottage in the countryside, it seemed perfect. The photos showed a quaint stone building surrounded by lush gardens, with promises of home-cooked meals and scenic hikes nearby. The host, a man named Edward, had glowing reviews praising his hospitality and local knowledge. We booked it without hesitation, eager for a break from the city and some quality time together. The drive out was beautiful, winding country roads taking us further from civilization with each passing mile. As we pulled up to the cottage, I felt a mix of excitement and relief. The place looked exactly like the photos, perhaps even more picturesque in person. Edward greeted us at the door, a tall, lean man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. His smile was warm as he welcomed us, helping with our bags and showing us around the property. "I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice rich and cultured. "I do hope you'll find everything to your liking. Dinner will be served at 7, if that suits you." We assured him it did, and he left us to settle in. The cottage was charming, with exposed wooden beams and a cozy fireplace in the living room. Our bedroom was upstairs, featuring a 4-poster bed draped in crisp white linens. "This place is amazing," Sarah gushed, wrapping her arms around me. "You did good, babe." I grinned, pleased with myself for finding such a perfect spot. We spent the afternoon exploring the gardens and nearby woods, hand in hand, feeling like we'd stepped into a fairy tale. As promised, dinner was served at 7. Edward had prepared a feast: roast lamb, buttery potatoes, and vegetables from his garden. The conversation flowed easily, Edward regaling us with stories of the area's history and his own travels. It wasn't until dessert that I noticed something odd. As Edward was pouring wine, his hand trembled slightly, causing a few drops to spill on the white tablecloth. His smile faltered for just a moment, a flash of something crossing his face. Anger, fear. It was gone so quickly I thought I must have imagined it. "I do apologize," he said smoothly, dabbing at the spill with a napkin. "Clumsy of me. More wine." We accepted, the excellent food and drink having put us in a mellow mood. As we finished our meal, Edward suggested we join him in the living room for a nightcap. "I have a special liqueur I think you'll enjoy," he said, that warm smile back in place. "A local specialty." In the living room, Edward poured us each a small glass of a golden liquid. It smelled sweet, with an underlying earthiness I couldn't quite place. "To new friends," Edward toasted, raising his glass. We clinked glasses and drank. The liqueur was delicious, warming me from the inside out. But as I swallowed, I felt a strange tingling sensation spread through my body. "Wow." Sarah giggled, her words slightly slurred. "That's strong stuff." I nodded in agreement, my own head starting to swim. The room seemed to be getting fuzzy around the edges, objects blurring and shifting when I tried to focus on them. Edward was talking, but his words sounded distant and muffled. I tried to stand, suddenly alarmed, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Beside me, Sarah slumped in her chair, her eyes fluttering closed. What did you do?" I managed to slur out, fighting against the heaviness in my limbs. Edward's smile was no longer warm. It was cold, predatory. "Don't fight it," he said softly. "It's easier if you don't fight it." Those were the last words I heard before darkness claimed me. I woke to the sound of dripping water. My head was pounding, my mouth dry as cotton. As I tried to move, I realized with a jolt of panic that I couldn't. My wrists and ankles were bound, securing me to what felt like a cold metal table. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light. I was in some kind of basement, the walls bare concrete, shelves lined with jars and bottles of various sizes, and strapped to a table next to me, still unconscious, was Sarah. "Sarah," I called out, my voice hoarse. "Sarah, wake up." She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Before I could try again, a door opened, and Edward stepped into view. "Ah, you're awake," he said, as casually as if we were still at the dinner table. "Excellent, we can begin." "Begin what?" I demanded, struggling against my restraints. "What the hell is going on?" Edward sighed, like a teacher disappointed in a slow student. "I had hoped you'd be more cooperative. The others usually are, by this point." A chill ran down my spine. "Others?" He nodded, moving to a nearby shelf and selecting a bottle filled with a viscous red liquid. "You're not the first, you know, and you won't be the last. It's necessary, you see." As he approached, I could see his eyes more clearly. They were no longer just piercing. They were inhuman, the pupils elongated like a cat's. "What are you?" I whispered, fear closing my throat. Edward smiled, and for a moment, I saw something else beneath his human facade, something ancient and terrible. "I am a collector," he said, "of experiences, of emotions, of essence." He uncorked the bottle, and the smell that wafted out made my stomach churn. "Human essence is so potent," he continued, "especially when harvested at the height of fear, or pleasure, or both." I renewed my struggles, the ropes cutting into my wrists. "You're insane," I spat. "People will look for us. They'll find you." Edward laughed, the sound echoing in the bare room. "Oh, my dear boy, no one will look for you. No one even knows you're here." With growing horror, I realized he was right. We hadn't told anyone the specific details of our trip. We'd wanted to be spontaneous, to disconnect from the world for a while. "Now," Edward said, lifting the bottle, "shall we begin?" What followed was a nightmare beyond imagination. Edward used his concoctions to keep us conscious but paralyzed, aware of everything he was doing but unable to resist. He drew out our emotions like a painter mixing colors, blending fear and pain and desperation into some twisted artwork only he could see. I lost track of time. It could have been hours or days. The only constant was Sarah's presence beside me, her hand occasionally brushing mine when Edward allowed us moments of movement. In rare lucid moments, I tried to plan an escape, but Edward was always there, always watching, always one step ahead. It was during one of these moments, as Edward prepared another of his vile mixtures, that I felt something change. The paralysis that had gripped me for so long began to fade. Whether it was a mistake in Edward's formula or some reserve of strength I didn't know I had, I suddenly found I could move. I waited, every muscle tense, for Edward to turn his back. The moment he did, I surged upward, snapping the weakened ropes. I tackled him from behind, sending us both crashing into the shelves. Bottles shattered, their contents mixing on the floor in a noxious puddle. Edward was stronger than he looked, but desperation lent me strength. We grappled on the floor, rolling through broken glass and spilled potions. I felt something slice into my arm, but I didn't care. All that mattered was stopping him, saving Sarah, getting out of this nightmare. Finally, my hand closed around a large shard of glass. Without hesitation, I plunged it into Edward's chest. He let out an inhuman shriek, his body convulsing. Before my eyes, his form began to shift and warp, skin bubbling and melting away to reveal something that was definitely not human underneath. I scrambled away, not wanting to see what Edward truly was. I rushed to Sarah, my shaking hands working to undo her restraints. Her eyes fluttered open as I lifted her into my arms. "We have to go," I said urgently. "In now." We staggered up the stairs and out of the cottage, not stopping until we reached our car. As I peeled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cottage was engulfed in flames, thick black smoke billowing into the sky. We drove in silence, both of us too shocked and traumatized to speak. It wasn't until we were miles away, the burning cottage long out of sight, that Sarah finally broke the silence. "Was any of it real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The cottage, the gardens. Was it all just a trap?" I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "And I don't think we ever will. We never went to the police. Who would believe us? Instead, we tried to move on to forget. But some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat. The memory of Edward's inhuman eyes burning in my mind. And sometimes, when I pass a quaint cottage or see an ad for a countryside getaway, I feel a chill run down my spine. Because now I know the truth. That sometimes, the most picturesque facades hide the darkest secrets. And that there are things in this world that prey on unsuspecting travelers. Things that wear human skin but are anything but human underneath. So if you're ever browsing rental listings and come across a charming cottage with an owner named Edward, keep scrolling. Some getaways are better left untaken. The moment I realized I wasn't alone in the gym, I knew my late-night workout had become a nightmare. But by then, it was already too late to leave unnoticed. I'd always been a night owl, preferring the quiet solitude of late hours to the bustling energy of the day. That's why I loved my 24-hour gym membership. There was something oddly peaceful about lifting weights or running on the treadmill at 2 a.m., when the rest of the world was asleep. That night started like any other. I arrived at the gym around midnight, nodding to the bored-looking attendant at the front desk as I swiped my card. The place was empty, as usual, just the way I liked it. I started with some cardio, the rhythmic thud of my feet on the treadmill echoing in the cavernous space. After about 30 minutes, I moved to the weight area, planning to finish with some strength training before heading home. It was while I was bench pressing that I first felt it, that prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of eyes on me. I racked the weights and sat up, looking around. The gym appeared empty, just as it had been when I arrived. But something felt off. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. I was being paranoid, letting the late hour and empty building get to me. I moved to the squat rack, determined to finish my workout. As I was setting up the bar, I heard it. A soft sound like a shoe scuffing against the floor. I whirled around, my heart suddenly racing. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet gym. "Is someone there?" No response, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint whir of distant treadmills on standby mode. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was probably just the building settling, or maybe the AC kicking on. Nothing to worry about. I turned back to the squat rack, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. I managed a few sets, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every time I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, I'd turn to look, only to find nothing there. The mirrors that lined the walls seemed to mock me, reflecting empty space where I could have sworn I'd seen a figure just moments before. By the time I finished my squats, I was a bundle of nerves. I decided to cut my workout short and head home. As I was toweling off, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. A shadow, moving behind one of the weight machines. A shadow that was distinctly human-shaped. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My breath came in short gasps as I scanned the gym. Everything looked normal, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone was in here with me, hiding, watching. I grabbed my gym bag and headed for the exit, trying to keep my pace normal even as every instinct screamed at me to run. As I passed the row of treadmills, I saw it again. A figure, reflected in the dark screen of one of the machines. It was only for a split second, but I saw it clearly this time. A man, tall and lean, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I broke into a run, no longer caring about appearances. I just needed to get out, to get to my car, to get home where it was safe. I burst out of the gym doors, gasping for air, and sprinted across the parking lot. It wasn't until I was in my car, doors locked and engine running, that I allowed myself to breathe. I looked back at the gym, half expecting to see my stalker emerge from the building. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, empty parking lot and the glowing neon sign of the 24-hour gym. I drove home in a daze, constantly checking my rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit. When I finally made it to my apartment, I double-checked all the locks before collapsing onto my couch, my mind racing. Who was that man? Why had he been watching me? And why hadn't he shown himself? I didn't sleep that night, jumping at every little sound, convinced that somehow he had followed me home. When morning finally came, I called the gym to report what had happened. The manager sounded concerned, promising to review the security footage and get back to me. But when he called later that day, his news only deepened the mystery. "I've gone through all the tapes," he said, sounding puzzled. "There's no sign of anyone else in the gym during your workout, just you." I argued with him, insisting that I knew what I'd seen. But he was adamant. The cameras showed no one entering or leaving the gym except me and the front desk attendant. According to the footage, I had been completely alone. I tried to put the incident out of my mind, telling myself I had imagined it all. Stress, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination. There were plenty of rational explanations, but deep down, I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. For the next week, I avoided the gym, working out at home instead. But as the days passed without incident, I began to feel foolish. I was letting one weird night rule my life. I needed to face my fears. So, exactly 1 week after that night, I went back to the gym. It was earlier this time, around 10 p.m., and there were a few other people scattered around the equipment. Their presence was reassuring as I started my workout. But as the hour grew later, people began to leave. By midnight, I was alone again. I considered leaving too, but stubbornness kept me there. I wasn't going to let fear control me. I was on the leg press machine when I felt it again. That same prickle on the back of my neck, the same sense of being watched. I looked around, my heart rate spiking, but saw no one. The gym looked empty, just as it had that night a week ago. I tried to focus on my workout, but the feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing minute. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection in the mirrors looked wrong somehow. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. And then, as I was returning a set of dumbbells to the rack, I saw him. In the mirror, clear as day, standing right behind me. The same tall, lean figure in dark clothes, baseball cap pulled low. This time I could see his face. His eyes, locked on mine in the mirror, were cold and empty. I spun around, a scream building in my throat, but there was no one there. The space behind me was empty. I looked back at the mirror, but the reflection showed only me, pale and shaking. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I grabbed my things and ran for the exit, not even bothering to change out of my workout clothes. As I burst out of the gym doors, I collided with someone coming in. We both stumbled, and I looked up to apologize. My words died in my throat. It was him, the man from the mirror, from the reflections. He steadied himself, then looked at me with those cold, empty eyes. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice low and oddly familiar. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen in terror as he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows its prey is trapped. "You should be more careful," he said, taking a step closer. "You never know who might be watching." I finally found my voice. "Who are you?" I managed to croak out. "What do you want?" His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "I want what I always want," he said. "A good workout partner." With that, he lunged at me. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I screamed. I know I fought. And I know that somehow, miraculously, I got away. I ran to my car and drove home, shaking and crying the whole way. I moved out of that town the next week, found a new job, a new apartment, a new gym. But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of a tall, lean figure in a baseball cap, reflected in a window or a car mirror. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that he's found me again. So if you ever find yourself alone in a gym late at night, and you get that feeling of being watched, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it away. Just leave. Because sometimes, the monsters we fear in the dark are real. And sometimes, they wear baseball caps and hang out in 24-hour gyms waiting for the perfect workout partner. A partner who might never be seen again. The moment we saw their eyes, we knew we'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late to turn back. It was supposed to be a quick pit stop, nothing more. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Tommy and Lily, and I were on our way to my parents' place for Thanksgiving when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. A wall of rain so thick I could barely see the road. The wind howled, rocking our minivan, and I knew we needed to find shelter fast. That's when we saw it. An old farmhouse, its porch light a beacon in the darkness. I pulled into the muddy driveway, relief washing over me as I cut the engine. "We'll just wait out the storm," I assured Sarah, who was eyeing the dilapidated building warily. "An hour, tops." If only I'd known then what I know now. We made a dash for the porch, the rain soaking us in seconds. I pounded on the door, praying someone was home. After what felt like an eternity, it creaked open. An elderly couple stood there, their faces etched with wrinkles, their eyes rheumy with age. The woman smiled, revealing teeth too white and perfect for someone her age. "Oh, you poor dear," she cooed. Come in out of that dreadful rain." We shuffled inside, grateful for the warmth. The interior was like stepping back in time. Doilies on every surface, a massive fireplace dominating one wall, the air heavy with the scent of mothballs and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm Martha," the woman said, "and this is my husband, George. We don't get many visitors out here." George nodded silently, his eyes never leaving us as Martha fussed over the kids, bringing towels and offering hot cocoa. "It's mighty fine of you to take us in like this," I said, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. "We won't impose long, just until the storm passes." Martha waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. We insist you stay for dinner. I've got a roast in the oven that's just about done." Before we could protest, she was ushering us into the dining room. The table was already set for 6, as if she'd been expecting us. As we sat down, I caught Sarah's eye. She looked as unsettled as I felt. Something about this place, about Martha and George, just felt off. The meal was delicious. I'll give them that. The meat was tender and flavorful, unlike any roast I'd had before. But as we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I looked up, I'd catch George staring at one of us, his expression unreadable. Martha kept up a steady stream of chatter, asking about our lives, our jobs, our kids. But her questions felt probing, invasive, and she never quite answered our questions about them or this place. As we finished eating, the storm outside seemed to intensify. The wind howled louder, tree branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. "My goodness," Martha said, peering out the window. "It's gotten quite bad out there. I'm afraid you'll have to stay the night." My stomach dropped. The thought of spending the night in this strange house made my skin crawl. But one look outside told me we had no choice. The road was barely visible through the torrential rain. "We've got plenty of room," Martha continued, that too perfect smile never leaving her face. "George will show you to your rooms." As we followed George up the creaking stairs, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the kids had become. Tommy, usually a chatterbox, hadn't said a word since dinner, and Lily was clinging to Sarah's hand, her eyes wide with fear. The bedroom George led us to was large but sparsely furnished. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, its sheets yellowed with age. "The children can sleep in here," George said, his voice raspy from disuse. He pointed to a door on the far wall. "You two will be next door." Before we could object to being separated from the kids, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. Sarah turned to me, her face pale. "John, I don't like this. Something's not right here." I nodded, pulling her close. "I know. But we don't have much choice. We'll leave first thing in the morning. I promise." We got the kids settled, doing our best to reassure them. But as we retreated to our own room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. Sleep didn't come easily. The unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old house kept startling me awake, and underneath it all was a sound I couldn't quite place. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. It was just past midnight when I heard it. A scream, quickly muffled, coming from the kids' room. I was out of bed in an instant, Sarah right behind me. But when we tried the door, it wouldn't budge. "Tommy, Lily," I shouted, ramming my shoulder against the wood. "Can you hear me?" No response, just that terrible silence. Panic gave me strength, and on the third try, the door splintered open. We rushed into the hallway only to find the kids' room empty. The bed was unmade, the window open, curtains billowing in the wind. "Oh God," Sarah sobbed. "Where are they?" A laugh echoed from downstairs, high and cruel. Martha's voice, but different now. No longer sweet and grandmotherly, but cold and mocking. "Looking for something?" she called up. Rage and fear propelled me down the stairs, Sarah at my heels. We burst into the living room to find Martha and George standing there, our children held tightly in their grasp. But they weren't the kindly old couple from earlier. Their skin seemed to ripple and shift, their eyes glowing an unnatural yellow in the firelight. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Martha's grin widened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "We are the hungry ones," she said, "the ones who feed on fear and flesh. And you, my dears, are the feast we've been waiting for." As she spoke, her form began to change. Her skin peeled away, revealing something ancient and terrible underneath. Beside her, George was undergoing a similar transformation. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the fire poker and swung it with all my might, catching the thing that used to be Martha in the face. She howled, releasing Lily, who ran to Sarah. George snarled, his grip on Tommy tightening. But Tommy, brave little Tommy, bit down hard on the creature's hand. George roared in pain, loosening his hold just enough for Tommy to wriggle free. "Run!" I shouted, swinging the poker again to keep the monsters at bay. We fled into the storm, the rain lashing at us as we ran for the car. Behind us, I could hear inhuman shrieks of rage. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. Just as the engine roared to life, something slammed into the side of the van. Martha's distorted face appeared at the window, her claws scraping against the glass. I floored it, the tires spinning in the mud before finally finding purchase. We shot down the driveway, the creature's howls fading into the distance. We drove through the night, not stopping until we were miles away and the storm had cleared. As the sun began to rise, we pulled into a rest stop, all of us shaken and exhausted. What were those things?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, unable to find words to explain the horror we'd just escaped. How could I make sense of creatures that defied everything I thought I knew about the world? We never made it to my parents' house that Thanksgiving. Instead, we checked into a motel, needing time to process what had happened. We debated going to the police way, but who would believe us? In the days that followed, I scoured the internet for any information about the farmhouse or its occupants. I found nothing, no records, no history, not even an address. It was as if the place had never existed, but I know it did. We all do. The nightmares that plague us, the way we jump at shadows. These are the scars left by our encounter with something beyond human understanding. Now, whenever we drive at night and see a lone farmhouse in the distance, a porch light glowing invitingly, we keep driving. No matter how bad the storm, no matter how tired we are, we don't stop, because we know the truth now. Sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes, they're waiting behind a kindly smile and an offer of shelter. And by the time you realize the danger, it's already too late. So if you're ever caught in a storm and see a light in the distance, promising safety and warmth, think twice before you stop, because you never know who or what might be waiting for you behind that door. And once you cross the threshold, there's no guarantee you'll ever leave.